Hello, everyone, and welcome to LGBTQ+PD, addressing the intersection between the LGBTQ+ and Parkinson's disease communities, presented by Acadia. Today's program is hosted by the Parkinson's Foundation and the Medical College of Georgia at Augusta University. The meeting will begin shortly. Attendees will be muted during today's program to help reduce background noise and echo, but we would love to see you on camera. To turn your camera on or off, just click the video camera icon at the bottom of your Zoom viewing panel. There will be a short introduction before today's presentations, and after each presentation, we'll take questions from our live audience. Questions can be submitted using the chat icon and the black banner on the bottom of your viewing page, and we'll do our best to address as many questions as we can. If you have any technical challenges during this meeting, please do let us know by sending a message to today's Zoom host. For optimal viewing of our speaker, please choose Speaker View at the top right-hand corner of your viewing page. We will begin promptly at the top of the hour. But before we officially kick off today's program, I want to invite Dr. Justin Flatt, Assistant Professor in the School of Public Health at the University of Nevada, to join us. Dr. Flatt is going to share a few words about two important research studies.
All right. Thanks so much, Annie, for letting me have some time just to talk about some of our work. And so I'm really excited to be here and share that. So I wanted to share with everyone, our group at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas is funded to conduct one of the first studies with the LGBTQIA+ community affected by Parkinson's disease. And our study is called PRIDE, Parkinson's Research with Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity. So we're doing this really because we know our population of LGBTQIA+ people that are age 50 and older are growing. And currently we know very little about the needs of our LGBTQIA+ community. And so this study, what's unique about it is that it's going to ask questions about specifically the physical and psychosocial health and healthcare needs of LGBTQIA+ people that are living with Parkinson's, as well as those that provide care to them. So we're going to have interviews with both caregivers and LGBTQIA+ people. As well, one of the things we want to understand is how prepared is the healthcare providers in terms of providing care to the community. So we're also going to have part of the study will be talking with healthcare providers. And then finally, for those of you that may be interested, we're also going to do some one-on-one interviews with caregivers just to learn more. So we anticipate that this study is going to be launched likely in June. And so please keep a lookout, and we'll make sure once it is launched, we'll share it back with Annie so others can learn about it. And then finally, I wanted to share another exciting study that we're doing right now. And this is called RISE, Research Inclusion Supports Equity. So similar about what I've mentioned about Parkinson's disease, it's also similar for people that are living with Alzheimer's and a related dementia. And so we currently have a study called RISE. And so the RISE registry is already launched, and we're recruiting people that are aged 18 and older who may have memory concerns or they're helping someone with memory loss. And this is specifically so we can really change the way research is being done with those that are affected by Alzheimer's disease. So if you're interested, I will put in the chat the link. And I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to get to share this with you today. If for some reason you want to reach me, I just put on here my email and emphasizing just how important it is to give back and empower. And so I'm just really grateful to be here today. So thank you so much. And I'm going to stop sharing.
Great. Thank you so much, Jason. Again, we are very excited to have everybody here with us today for LGBTQ+PD, addressing the intersection between the LGBTQ+ and Parkinson's disease communities, hosted by the Parkinson's Foundation and the Medical College of Georgia at Augusta University, a Parkinson's Foundation Center of Excellence. My name is Annie Long, and I am an Associate Director of Community Programs at the Parkinson's Foundation, and we are thrilled to have you with us today. Today's program is presented by Acadia. Acadia is a biopharmaceutical company based out of San Diego, California. Acadia is committed to addressing unmet needs in the neurology space. Acadia is honored to support this program and important content in support of the LGBT community. At Acadia, they live these values internally as well as externally. They have an active DEI council dedicated to the LGBT community and allies. They are passionate about supporting multiple communities in the Parkinson space. We're very grateful to have Acadia's support, so thank you. Okay, without further ado, to kick off today's program, I'd like to introduce a very special person, Martha Ann Tudor. Martha Ann Tudor was formerly the Parkinson's Foundation Center of Excellence Coordinator, Patient Educator, Counselor, and Outreach Coordinator for the Movement Disorders Program at the Medical College of Georgia at Augusta University. Martha Ann is now a health editor for WebMD. Martha Ann, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a huge honor, personally and professionally today. I want to, first of all, start just by thanking each and every one of you for taking this time today to focus on some issues that really concern everyone, even if everyone may not know that yet. And one of the great things about these formats like this is that we really can all connect from wherever we might be. And that underscores the point that these are conversations that need to be happening everywhere. Augusta, Georgia may not seem like the most likely place for a first in nation program addressing those living in the intersection of LGBTQ and Parkinson's to initiate, but it underscores the point that really these are issues that concern every person living with Parkinson's, every healthcare provider, every healthcare setting, every social service and program, every support program, every healthcare initiative, every mental health initiative, everywhere. So we thank you today, and we look at this program today as simply the start of a series, hopefully, of conversations. We hope that wherever you are listening to this, either today live or in a recorded format going forward, that this will be the start of conversations or bolster conversations already begun in your communities. And that this will just be the spark that raises awareness and that gets other programs going. When I was working directly with Parkinson's patients last fall, I had an LGBTQ individual newly diagnosed with Parkinson's. And he lives alone, and this person lives alone, does not have family. And together, we encountered daunting challenges when it came to finding this person's support, services, places where they felt safe and understood, and programs that were designed with them in mind. And when I went to the Parkinson's Foundation and asked about this particular program, it was met with an enthusiastic response because it aligns with the Parkinson Foundation's initiatives and programs designed with leaving no one out, leaving no one behind, there to meet everyone and where they are, and understanding and education, ongoing education for everyone. So we are thrilled, and I am now here today somehow watching this program not just come to life, but be presented by an absolute dream team of my heroes, my personal heroes and professional heroes who are on the front lines every single day. And I could not be more honored to be part of this with them, and more thrilled to see this program have flourished into what we're getting ready to enjoy today. And just thank you all again. And I'm truly honored to be part of this. Thank you. And thank you, Annie.
Thank you so much, Martha Ann. And again, thanks to all of you for joining us today. It is now my pleasure to introduce Cheryl Wayland, who is the Director of Special Initiatives at SAGE. In Cheryl's current role, she directs the operations of programs such as SAGE Care and the National Resource Center on LGBTQ+ aging. Cheryl, thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much, Annie, and thank you to Martha as well. Anytime I have an invitation like this, it's really an honor because I know that the importance of LGBTQ plus health access and support um, is just as important in small communities as it is in large communities. And it's just really an honor to see that the Georgia chapter took this work on. So again, just want to thank you for this invitation to be here today. Before I get started, I just also want to give a fair warning. There are storms rolling through my area right now, and I have 2 puppies, and they've decided that they need to stay right at my feet. I have dog treats, so as they bark, I'm giving them a treat. So hopefully things will stay calm as we go through this morning. But with that, I do want to start sharing my slide deck with you today. And I'll be preparing a handout that will be available after the session today as well, with all the different links and stuff that I'm sharing today. So for my presentation today, I really wanted to focus on navigating the intersections of being LGBTQ+, living with Parkinson's disease, and how we can really advocate for ourselves as well as others within the health and aging system. So that's going to be the focus of what I share with you today. For those of you that may not be familiar with SAGE, SAGE is the country's largest and oldest organization dedicated to improving the lives of LGBTQ plus older adults. And our mission is really to lead in addressing issues related to lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender aging. And yes, we have a roll of thunder. So gonna give some dog treats here. There we go. We also have to multitask when we work remotely. So that's what I'll be doing today. SAGE is headquartered in New York City and offers a number of services throughout New York, including the lead agency for the National Resource Center on LGBTQ plus aging, SAGE Cares training and credentialing program, and the first ever LGBTQ plus senior centers. We have 5 senior centers across the boroughs of New York City. So that's really important work that we're doing in New York City. As we really start to think about our LGBTQ plus older adult community members, back in 2015, they estimated approximately 3 million. As Jason referred, I think we're now closer to between 4 and 5 million LGBTQ plus older adults. And by 2030, we expect this population to grow to nearly 7 million. And, one of the things that people will sometimes ask is, well, why is the population growing this fast? Well, we know that baby boomers are a growing population. And we also know that more and more LGBTQ plus older adults are becoming more comfortable to be out and to share about, our lives as LGBTQ plus people. So as more and more people come out and identify as gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer, those numbers are going to continue to grow as well. So why focus on LGBTQ plus communities? And this is a quote from one of our fact sheets, and I think it really does a good job of really centering the conversation today. Going to the doctor or seeking medical care for even minor issues presents unique challenges for LGBTQ plus people. The decision to come out to your provider, concerns about interactions and reactions from providers, this can really hinder the healthcare that we receive, as well as our ability to be open and honest with our providers. So, that's one of the reasons why it's really important for us to think about the intersections of being LGBTQ plus, as well as, receiving supportive services in healthcare and aging services. The Parkinson's Association has estimated that there's nearly 100,000 LGBTQ plus folks living with Parkinson's. And sometimes folks will look at these types of numbers and statistics and say, well, is that really a critical need? And one of the things that I like to do is ask people to visualize what 100,000 people looks like. So if everybody today went to Michigan State University for a football game, and you looked around that stadium and you realized that every single person sitting in that stadium was LGBTQ plus and also living with Parkinson's, that would help to explain why this is critical. And when we start to think of numbers as people, that's what really starts to frame the importance of this work. Because we see that, that would be a large gathering of folks who share commonalities, who share same concerns, and is really the focus of why we're here today. So I hope that kind of helps frame, why it's important to think about LGBTQ plus folks living with Parkinson's. We also know that there are some common concerns for LGBTQ plus communities. And some of those things include the fact that 34% of LGBTQ plus people live alone. 32% don't want to be alone and are actually concerned about their aging process and living alone. We also know that an additional 40% have shrinking support networks, and they oftentimes will seek to the internet for companionship and finding support. So, why are these concerns for us? Part of the concerns, are the fact that LGBTQ plus older adults living alone oftentimes don't have the same access to supports that other older adults may have. And so it's really important that we think about the support structures, especially in programs that are offered through groups like the Parkinson's Association. How are people being supported if they're already at risk for higher social isolation and loneliness as they age? So those are some of the common LGBTQ plus concerns that we see. We also want to think about the lived experiences of our LGBTQ plus older adults. LGBTQ plus people have had a history of discrimination, and this discrimination has oftentimes taken place in healthcare settings, in aging settings. So if you've experienced a history of discrimination and stigma at the hands of folks that we're really asking now to show us support, concern, compassion, and quality care, it can really interfere with our comfort level in seeking those supportive services. So that's one of the reasons why it's so important to center LGBTQ plus services in these settings. We also know that there's a reliance on families of choice and oftentimes same age peers. Why would this be a concern? One of the reasons for this being a concern is that when we think about caregiving, it's oftentimes provided by children. And we know that LGBTQ plus older adults oftentimes are less likely to have children, as well as being more likely to live alone. So that reliance on families of choice is oftentimes being supported by the broader community, by people that we've invited into our lives, and they're oftentimes not recognized legally to be the folks providing that level of support for us. So that becomes a concern if LGBTQ plus older adults haven't done the planning to ensure that they have durable powers of attorney, that have been named, that they have folks that can serve as their healthcare proxies. And so it's really important that folks are taking the time to develop the plans and really have things in place to support them as they age. The other issue around same age peers, I want to take a few minutes and just talk about this because I think it's oftentimes not recognized how critical same age peers can be to one another, in those support structures, but also how fragile a support system becomes if it's made up of all same age peers. Through my work here with SAGE and in St. Louis in particular, gonna let the pups leave real quick. Sorry about that. in our work in particular here in St. Louis, I befriended 4 women, and they were best friends. They had known each other for going on 50 years, and they did everything together. They went to lunches together. They drove each other to doctor's appointments. They helped each other out, around their house, no matter what. If somebody needed a ride to the grocery store, they stepped in. We lost one of the women right as we went into COVID. And so that, and the 4 women, it was 2 couples. And so one of the partners died right as we went into COVID. So that left another one of the women, living alone and isolated. Then we saw the other couple experience their own health concerns. One had a heart attack, another had a stroke, and one was also developing dementia. So this left a very fragile support system. They went from 4 women supporting one another to 3 women supporting one another. And then over the last year, one of the couples, both of the folks in that couple passed away. So here we have 1 woman left, and she's really lost her entire support network that she had relied on for 50+ years. So when we think about these same age peers and these support structures, we start to see just how critical, developing a bigger support system can be. And so when we think about folks aging with Parkinson's disease, thinking about who is there to support folks, who is there to help when they need that level of care and support that may come, as we age. Those are really things that we want to think about, and also to think about how we can support the families of choice. Have they developed the care plans that make sure that, people can make decisions on their behalf and with them should that time come? And we'll be giving some resources later in this presentation to help with that. Some of the other things that we also see, because of the history of discrimination, we can see that the lack of access to LGBTQ+ welcoming health services. And, the Human Rights Campaign Foundation Long-Term Care or Healthcare Equality Index is one of the programs that has really helped to support greater access to LGBT welcoming healthcare services. And, that's always a resource that we help people locate and find supportive services in their communities. The history of discrimination and stigma has oftentimes also led to a delay in seeking supportive services. So if folks fear discrimination and they've had real experiences with stigma and discrimination within healthcare systems, they oftentimes won't seek supportive services. They won't go for preventative healthcare screenings. They may, learn later in life that they have Parkinson's or some other health concern. And this can, that delay in healthcare leads to that delay in the preventative programs that helps them remain healthier as they age. So it really becomes a concern for our older adult community if we've not been seeking those supportive services that are available. And what we've oftentimes found as far as aging services, that if a person has delayed services and delayed seeking the supportive services that are available, such as nutrition programs, transportation assistance, home care programs and services through your area agencies on aging, that oftentimes the services are not sought until it's too late. And so we've seen people have to immediately leave their homes and go into a long-term care setting because those supportive services haven't been provided early enough to help them remain at home where they can age in place. We also see an increased risk of health disparities and disability. If we've delayed services, we've delayed preventative care, then we're going to see an increase in health disparities, which can also lead to disabilities as we age. So again, it's important that we start to create these systems that are welcoming and supportive of LGBTQ+ older adults. And then finally, this increased reliance on paid long-term care services. There's a couple of reasons here. One, lacking support systems. If we don't have children, if we don't have extended family who's providing support, and its reliance on families of choice and same-age peers, then we may need to turn to more paid services, including skilled nursing and assisted living, in order for us to age with a sense of health and equity. So we see that there's this heavy reliance on some of the long-term care services and supports. Aging at the intersections. I think it's always important that we really think about, what that means for us. And one of the quotes that really speaks to me is from Kimberly Crenshaw. And she states that intersectionality is a lens through which we can see where power comes and collides, where it interlocks and intersects. It's not simply that there's a race problem here, a gender problem here, and an a class or LGBTQ problem there. Many times that framework erases what happens to people who are subject to all of these things. So when we're here today, we're really thinking about the intersections of every person that we serve, and knowing that they may have multiple characteristics and intersecting identities that can lead to even greater challenges, especially when it comes to, interacting with healthcare systems and other aging systems. So it's really important that we see people for their whole selves and how all of these intersecting identities can impact their health and well-being, and especially that sense of equity. So this is one of the things that I always like to reflect on in my work. And I hope that more of us will start to do this as we are thinking about the services and supports that we provide. So I want to spend a few minutes now talking about some of the resources that we have available through the National Resource Center on LGBTQ+ aging, as well as some of the other programs that I work with here at SAGE. We've prepared a document that's really designed for self-advocacy for LGBTQ+ older adults. LGBT communities are resilient, and we have a history of creating change through large and small efforts. And advocacy is an important tool LGBTQ+ people have in securing and managing quality health care. One of the models that I really like to think about in terms of self-advocacy are people aging and living with disabilities. And self-advocacy has always been kind of a center focus for folks living with disabilities. And so how do we take that and apply those same types of models for LGBTQ+ older adults? And that's really, embracing self-advocacy. So providing tools and resources that help LGBTQ+ older adults, prepare for their own interactions within health and aging systems is one of those ways to help them be better prepared. In this document, it's a real easy fact sheet to use and look through, but there's 4 main things that we think about. The first is preparation. When we're thinking about interacting with healthcare systems as an LGBTQ+ older adult, how are we prepared? Sit down, write out all the questions that you may have for your doctor, for your healthcare providers, for your specialists. Because as we age and we may have a number of health concerns, the number of doctors that we may end up going to can be overwhelming. And so it's really important that we prepare for each one of those healthcare encounters. Also prepare by thinking if there's one of your family of choice members or your spouse, partner, somebody who can go with you and also help advocate with you in that healthcare setting. Another area that we like to think about is communication. How are we communicating our needs to our healthcare providers? Are they aware of what we need, of what our concerns are? It's really important that we think about how we're communicating, and also how we're encountering people in their office. When we can find supportive nurses and other folks in that medical professionals space, then that can help us as well with our communication. Another area is cultivation. And again, this is really speaking to a lot of the other folks that we may be encountering, not just the doctor, but nurses, the clerk, who's checking us in when we go in for a doctor's appointment. Cultivating positive relationships with all the people that we're encountering can help us to have better access to our doctors and our specialists. And then finally, the other thing that we talk about is documentation, making sure that you have access to your medical records. If you have a question about what your doctor has been sharing with you, go back to them and ask them for a report on, on your latest checkup, on your latest medical procedure that you've had, and make sure that you have all those resources available for you as you encounter the healthcare system. So this is just one of the documents that we've prepared, and it's available for download and to share with others, that you may be working with. Another important piece that we've developed and is another tool for self-advocacy is a guide on care planning. And I can't stress this one enough, because I think our own self-advocacy starts with planning for our care. And too often we don't think about planning for our care until we're in a crisis. So taking the time, to do pre-planning is really important. And this guide helps take us through a number of different areas that I think can really help us, regardless of where we may be in the encountering healthcare systems. Some of the things that it goes through is helping us to look at what to expect before and after medical procedures. It could be regular routines that we're going in for, or maybe it's a surgery or, another critical aspect of our care that we really need to think about. It also helps you think about the questions that you want to ask your doctor. Looking for and choosing LGBTQ plus affirming providers. It gives you a number of tips and resources to think about, because it's really hard, to navigate these healthcare systems and know, is this a doctor that I am going to feel comfortable with? And one of the best ways to do that is to seek out guidance from the LGBTQ plus community, who may also be engaging, with healthcare providers. There's a couple of listservs that I belong to, and some Facebook groups. And I would say it's probably almost a daily occurrence that you will see somebody, chime in and say, I'm looking for a new, healthcare provider. Can anybody recommend somebody that's LGBTQ plus friendly? So it's really important to think about, where are we going for care, and who is providing supportive services. But it's also important to recognize that not everybody has choice, depending on, the availability of healthcare systems in your community. There's not always choice for encountering somebody who's openly identified as LGBTQ plus welcoming. So some of the tips and tools in this guide can help you kind of navigate that system as well. One of the things we also stress in this guide is asking for help. I think that's one of the most challenging things that really most everybody deals with, is how do we ask for help? And how do we become more comfortable feeling like it's okay to ask for help? And so this guide helps prepare us for that. And I think part of that is also thinking about the types of help that we may need. So it's easier if we can develop a list that says, I'm going to be going in for a procedure, or I know that, I'm going to be home for a while recovering from, a healthcare crisis or encounter. And these are the types of things that I may need help with. I need somebody that can go to the grocery store for me, or pick up my medications, walk my dog, or my 2 dogs, as may be the case for me. Those are things that can be really beneficial for someone, but it's oftentimes hard to ask for that help. So this guide helps us to start to think about what types of help do we need, and how do we ask for that help. I think it's also important for folks, oftentimes people want to offer help, but they don't know what to offer. And so just to start to have these conversations with the folks in our circles and our communities can be really empowering as we think about, you know, I can go to the grocery store for you. I can walk your dog, you know, let me be there, let me help. So, you know, this guide helps folks to really think about that. And then finally at the end, you know, we talk through issues around advanced care directives, hospital visitation rights, and other things that oftentimes people put off. And it's really important that people know you have the right to name the folks that you want supporting you. You have the right to name the folks that you want being able to gain access, you know, to your medical information and also for visitations in hospitals. So it's going through programs and resources like this that can really be beneficial. And again, this is available for download on the Resource Center website. When we think about encountering our healthcare systems and other aging services, there's a couple of resources that are also really important for advocacy on behalf of LGBTQ+ communities. So if you're a provider or a professional in the room today, I encourage you to look at these resources. The first is Inclusive Services for LGBT Older Adults, and this is a practical guide to creating welcoming agencies. It really helps you to evaluate, you know, are we a supportive service? What does that mean to be a supportive and welcoming agency? Have we taken the time to evaluate our own internal policies and procedures and make sure that they're fully supportive of LGBTQ+ older adults? So I encourage you to look through this. There's best practices that we have available, and it can really help organizations start to think about how they need to do a better job of centering supports and services and policies and procedures for LGBTQ+ older adults. The next guide that we have is Inclusive Questions for Older Adults, a practical guide to collecting data on sexual orientation and gender identity. As Dr. Flatt mentioned in the beginning of the presentation today, we don't know a great deal about the experiences of LGBTQ+ older adults, LGBTQ+ communities in general, in many of the things that we you know, talk about in aging and health services. And that's because there's been a lack of data. And so it's important that we start to collect information on sexual orientation and gender identity. A lot of people will say, well, these are private questions. These are things that people aren't comfortable talking about. The reality is we talk about sexual orientation and gender identity every single day. We just haven't claimed it. If you talk about, you know, if you're a cisgender heterosexual person and you talk about what you did with your husband or your boyfriend or girlfriend over the weekend, you're talking about your sexual orientation. So when we start to frame these conversations as really everyday conversations that we all have on a daily basis, then it starts to break down some of the stigma around asking these questions. And so this guide helps you to think about, you know, here's the questions that we should be asking, and here's how we can ask those questions. And again, it comes with a number of best practices that can help as you start to center this work in your communities. And I'm really excited about this next guide that was actually developed, you know, with the Parkinson's Association and with SAGE. And this is Supporting LGBTQ+ People with Parkinson's, a guide for LGBTQ+ community centers and health centers. One of the key parts for self-advocacy is also encouraging groups working within the LGBTQ+ community to have a greater understanding of the things that impact our community. And Parkinson's is one of the issues that I'm sure has not received a lot of attention within the LGBTQ+ community. So this guide will help to bring those resources to light. And by focusing on our community centers, we have over 300 LGBTQ+ community centers across the country. We have a number of federally qualified health centers that do specific LGBTQ plus outreach. By getting information into their hands, then they can better help prepare their patients for understanding and their clients for understanding some of the concerns that are related to Parkinson's disease as an LGBTQ plus person. What's included in this guide includes 10 early signs of Parkinson's, a basic understanding of Parkinson's, key questions to ask your doctors, 5 steps to live better every day with Parkinson's, and a guide for support group leaders. So I'm really excited for us to start pushing this resource out to our communities so that the LGBTQ plus community can get more actively engaged with support of our own community members. And then we also have some resources that are really designed for LGBTQ plus older adults that I wanted to highlight today. One is our National LGBTQ plus hotline. This hotline is available 24/7, 365 days out of the week. It's in partnership with United Way Worldwide, and it's really a support line and kind of a crisis line. The nice thing about this hotline is because it's in partnership with United Way, they can actually get people connected to their local community and to the providers in their community that they may need. We have found, through the work with the hotline that 53% of our folks that are calling in are experiencing some level of social isolation. And so this hotline can really be a critical support system for folks who are feeling isolated and alone in their homes and communities. Another resource is our program called Sage Connect. And this is a friendly call line where people can be matched with a volunteer who will reach out to them and call them on a weekly basis to check in and provide friendship and support. And again, can help connect them also to needed resources in the community. So these are 2 programs that we just wanted to make sure that folks are aware of on the call today. And then a couple of other resources. One is our Long-Term Care Equality Index. This is a program designed to work with retirement communities, assisted living, skilled nursing, to make sure that folks have access to quality care and supportive services as they age. Through this program, the long-term care communities actually take a self-assessment, and they are then provided with a report that helps them identify, the areas that they need to improve upon to truly be LGBTQ plus inclusive. They then have an opportunity to implement policies and procedures that really support LGBTQ plus inclusivity, and will then have the opportunity to take a survey where they will be able to demonstrate back to our community that they have all of these best practices in place to better support LGBTQ plus older adults. As we said earlier, there is a heavy reliance on paid long-term care services and support. So a program like this is really critical for LGBTQ plus older adults. This guide one of the guides that we have available through the Long-Term Care Equality Index is finding an inclusive long-term care community. From a place of self-advocacy, we know that, there's still limited long-term care providers across the country who are outwardly promoting LGBTQ plus inclusivity. And so this guide helps older adults and their caregivers really start to evaluate, is this a place that has policies and procedures in place? Is this an organization where I'm going to feel welcomed and supported? And if not, it's also a guide that you can hand to that community and say, we'd really like for you to become LGBTQ plus inclusive. And here's some steps to help you along the way. So again, this is a part of self-advocacy that we encourage LGBTQ plus older adults to think about. And then for professionals in the room, we have our Sage Care training and credentialing program. This is a fee-for-service program available through Sage, and it provides organizations with the opportunity to invest in LGBTQ plus cultural competency. For folks that complete the training, they can also then qualify for our credential, which helps you to, again, have that outward signal to the community that you're not only LGBTQ plus inclusive, but you've also invested in, LGBTQ plus inclusivity for your community. So these are just a couple of other resources that we wanted to leave you with today. And I think that puts me right at my time for this presentation. I just wanted to end by, sharing my contact information and 3 of the websites that we've talked about today, where you can go and find additional information on SAGE, as well as the self-advocacy tools and resources. Again, just want to thank you for your time today, and I think there's some time for Q&A, so I'm going to turn it over to Annie.
Cheryl, thank you so much. That was so interesting to learn about all the resources that you have available. So thank you. So if anybody does have a question, please put it in the chat. I know our chat's been a little quiet, so I'd love to hear from our folks. I'll go ahead and ask just a couple of follow-up questions that I have, Cheryl, if you don't mind. I guess if we could start maybe with the credential that you just referenced, the Sage Care credential, I believe. So is that offered to what types of organizations, I guess, can apply that credential?
Yeah, so the Sage Care training and credential program is really open to any organization that wants to increase their cultural competency. So, we work with healthcare providers, area agencies on aging, long-term care communities, home care providers. Really it runs the gamut of anybody that's interested in LGBTQ plus aging. We also have a trying to think. It's Saturday morning and not enough coffee yet. We also have the opportunity for individuals who want to take training to go online and purchase one of the trainings that they can take, from the comfort of their home as well. So we provide services for the individual as well as organizations.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. I did get a question, I know, prior to the session today, and this person was asking specifically about end of life resources. So, I guess from what does Sage offer those who are really trying to advocate for their LGBTQ plus elders with Parkinson's at end of life? What are some of the resources?
Yeah, so we've, again, with Sage Care, we're starting to work with more and more hospice providers, with end of life doulas. So we're really starting to see more people engage with Sage for end of life, services and supports. I think one of the most important things that we offer through the National Resource Center on LGBTQ plus aging are some of the planning documents. So starting to think now about, what do we want at the end of life? How do we want to be supported? Who do we want in the room with us? Should the time be coming when we're thinking about, those end of life months or weeks that folks may be experiencing. So those are some of the things that, we've been offering through the National Resource Center. And then again, the Long-Term Care Quality Index, oftentimes folks are, in long-term care communities. So thinking about, finding a place where people are going to be supported, in their end of life journeys is really important.
Absolutely. And I know, obviously over the last few years, people who may have been isolated prior to COVID felt even more so during COVID. What types of networking opportunities, if you could just reiterate, what are some of the networking opportunities that Sage provides to LGBTQ plus elders in the community?
Yeah, thank you. Sage Connect was actually really started because of and in response to COVID. We immediately recognized as our centers had to start closing, as programs across the country, started to go virtual, How are we going to stay connected with LGBTQ plus older adults and make sure that they had supports? And so Sage Connect, came about in a response to COVID. And, just it was incredible to see how many programs were really able to really kind of be birthed in a number of days and weeks, to support older adults across the country. So Sage Connect was one of those programs, and again, helps provide that friendly visit, to LGBTQ plus older adults. We also recognize that when so many of our programs went virtual, that we started to reach people that we had never reached before. And so as we start to see a lessening in COVID, but now we're also seeing a spike, I'm hoping that more programs will adopt a hybrid model so that, we don't become overly reliant again on in-person programming when we already know that there's a number of people that are already isolated, in their homes, and that virtual programming can really help to reach out to folks. Sage and a number of other aging organizations are looking at virtual centers and, providing that ongoing support virtually for folks that may, be at home and not be able to access community for a number of reasons.
I just had a great comment / question come in. So this person just said, as a person with Parkinson's and a parent of 2 LGBTQ plus children, first, I want to say thank you. This program information is very eye-opening. I've always tried to instill the value of no person or group of people should ever feel less than. What advice would you give to a parent of an LGBTQ plus adult?
Thank you for that. What advice would I give a parent? This makes me think, like, what advice do I give my own mother? So, I think part of it is one, celebrating your children. So often, part of the reason that we talk about LGBT older adults having to rely on families of choice is because many of our older adults became disenfranchised from their kinship families, from their blood relatives when they came out. And so it really gives me hope today to see more and more parents saying, I have 2 gay children and I love them and support them just as I would, if they weren't gay. So I think that's really empowering to see that. And there was something else, and I'm sure it was really important for me to say, and it just like went away. But I just really want to thank you for, speaking out and being there to support your children. I think the other important thing about this work is we know that, especially within some of our aging and long-term care systems, that LGBTQ plus folks still aren't being recognized. And we want to make sure that the children of people with Parkinson's, of people that are aging with disabilities, that their LGBTQ plus family members are welcomed and supported into those family systems of care that happens within long-term care. So I think it's really important that we're out about our relationships, out about our family members, and that everybody feels welcomed within those care settings. I think the other thing that I was going to say is I think today is different than any other time in really our history when we think about LGBTQ plus people. And that's the fact that I think every family member today, or almost every family member today, could look around and say, I know someone in my family who is LGBTQ. I know somebody in my neighborhood or in my community who is LGBTQ. And so we're really starting to see this opportunity to be allies and to support one another.
Great. Well, Cheryl, thank you so much. And yeah, and we actually, the Parkinson's Foundation, through our community grants program, we helped fund a community grant called Parkinson's Pride, which highlighted the special issues for some of our younger people with Parkinson's who identify as members of the LGBTQ plus community. So I will be sure to send information out about that grant program, as well as Cheryl, all the amazing resources that you shared with us today, as well as some of the resources that the Parkinson's Foundation has to offer as well. So following this program, we will be sending out a link to the recording as well as a link to a lot of these resources. So, but on that note, Cheryl, I know you talked about you know, the children of people living with Parkinson's. It's a great segue, actually, because our next segment, we're actually going to hear from two siblings who have members, who have people with Parkinson's in their family, and just kind of how they've navigated that and some of the parallels that they've seen, you know, in terms of their own journey as members of the LGBTQ plus community, and then, you know, their father's journey with Parkinson's, for example. So we're going to go ahead and get to that. But Cheryl, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for all the work that you've done. And we're really excited to see more partnership opportunities between SAGE and the Parkinson's Foundation. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Annie.
All right, so without further ado, now we're going to play again a short video. This was pre-recorded by Annie Brooks, who is the Director of Education for the Parkinson's Foundation. Annie is interviewing two siblings, again, who have family members living with Parkinson's. So we're really excited to share this with you guys today. And we'll go ahead and play that video. We're going to cue that up for you right now.
Hello, my name is Annie Brooks, and I am the Director of Education at the Parkinson's Foundation, where I oversee, among other things, our Care Partner programs. Not everyone recognizes the children of people with Parkinson's as part of the caregiving team, especially when their parent was diagnosed while they were still fairly young. But I'm a firm believer that Parkinson's is a family affair. With that in mind, I'm here today with Zachary and Caitlin, siblings whose father has Parkinson's. They've agreed to share their experience with the intersection of Parkinson's disease and their LGBTQ plus identities. Zachary, I would love to start with you and have you introduce yourself.
Hi, Annie. My name is Zachary. Pronouns are he, his, and I'm gay.
Hi, my name is Caitlin. My pronouns are she, her, and I generally identify as queer.
Can you guys tell me a little bit more about the Parkinson's in your family and your connection to the disease?
Absolutely. So our father has young onset Parkinson's disease. He was diagnosed a few years ago. And our grandfather, on the other hand, was also diagnosed only a few years ago, but obviously was several years older than our father when he was diagnosed as well. I think we knew about our grandfather first for a few years, and then our father afterwards. And obviously, as the son and grandson of two people with Parkinson's, it's something that's on my mind pretty frequently. And I'd be lying if I didn't say that it's a concern of mine as I get older as well, and definitely something on my radar as I may or may not experience symptoms as I get older.
I'm curious if you feel that your queer identities have intersected at all with your experience of Parkinson's disease in the family. Do you see any overlap or any conflict or similarities there?
Yeah, it's a great question. And Katie, I don't want to, if you want to go first, let me know, or jump in if you want. But I know for me, at least, even thinking about the time that our dad told us that he was officially diagnosed after a few years of incorrect diagnoses and a really, really arduous process to finally get to that diagnosis, which I know is fairly common for a lot of people, especially with young onset PD. I remember thinking that it felt exactly like what it felt like to come out to my dad years earlier. So I came out to my family when I was 16, and if it was like he was coming out to me, just with different information. And the steps that he went through were the same that I and many others in the LGBTQ community have to go through to come out to your family, your friends. He sat us down. I could tell he was really nervous. There was a lot of trepidation in his voice. He shares this news, and then it's sort of like the fear and the waiting to see how we react. And then, of course, immediately that sort of feeling of relief once it's all over. And it was in that moment that I realized people with chronic illness, especially something like Parkinson's disease, have to go through a coming out the same way that if you're gay or queer, LGBTQ in any way, you often have to go through that in some shape or form with some loved ones in your life.
I think another important part with that is that with being part of the LGBTQ plus community and part of the Parkinson's community, there's not a lot of representation in media and not a lot of education and resources easily out there for people. And I think once people are able to get to those resources and find their community that they fit in, they realize that they're no longer alone. So I feel like there's a lot of similarities between those two communities and the need to have other people around you that understand what you're going through.
Yeah, and I know that a lot of times, I'll speak for myself as someone who is part of the queer community. I feel that I'm responsible for educating those around me who are not part of this community or living with the same experience. And I see the same thing for folks who are connected to Parkinson's disease. Have you seen that sort of in your family?
I think we've definitely seen that with our father. He's been really good with educating us throughout the whole process, especially when he first was diagnosed. He sat us down to let us know kind of what we could expect to come in the future. And every now and then he'll let us know as well what his symptoms are or what we can expect to see changing. So I think just educating those around you definitely helps prepare them. So that way there's no surprises and everyone can be supporting throughout the entire journey.
Yeah, and vice versa, right? So it's like I feel like over the years we've also educated our family, our dad, everyone on LGBTQ issues as well, and explaining what non-binary means, or gender-neutral pronouns. It's like a big conversation, especially with people our parents' age, having to sit them down and have that conversation, not necessarily because it's specific to my identity or Katie's identity, but it's important to us that they have that information as they walk through the world, because we're part of a bigger community than just our own identities. And in the same vein, to Katie's point, Dad's definitely done his job to educate us on not just his own experience with the disease, but also other people's experiences and our grandfather's experience, and also as our dad gets older, what we can potentially expect as his symptoms come and go and change. And it's not always the easiest conversation to have back and forth. I mean, it's a lot of energy and effort put on the person to educate other people, but I think that meeting halfway has been really helpful for us. And it's sort of inspired and pushed me to, Dad might send me an article or chat with me for a few minutes, and then I think, all right, you know what, I should do a little more research myself, and then kind of go the extra mile. And I feel like he has also done a great job at doing the same with respect to LGBTQ issues as well.
Do you find that your dad or your grandfather's Parkinson's has any impact on the family dynamics around your identities and your experience of the world because of them?
I think that we're very lucky with our family, and that everyone's very accepting and loving. And I think that the only difference that we've seen with the cognitive changes that Parkinson's has is the sort of like fixation or hesitation to understand certain things, but it doesn't come from a place of not accepting or not loving. It's it's more of those cognitive differences that you see as the Parkinson's progresses, which of course we see more with our grandfather than our father right now.
Yeah, that's at present, I don't, yeah, to Katie's point, I don't currently feel that there's much of an impact, but it is something that I feel like we have started to think about as we get older and as both of them get older as well. Something almost like I'm bracing for, which is difficult, right? If you are in a family where your parents are accepting of who you are when you come out as gay or as queer, the realization that as they get older, as the disease progresses cognitively, that there could be a day where they suddenly say something that is totally against what they've presented to you previously in terms of their acceptance. It's shaking. I mean, it can really upset you. And I know we've experienced this, not as much with our father's Parkinson's, but our grandmother has pretty late stage dementia right now. And we've also experienced on that side with her this conversation of whoa, no, wait, she totally accepts me. Why would she say something like that? And it's kind of having to separate the person from the disease to a degree. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's important to recognize that while, you know, dementia is not always part of Parkinson's, it can be.
Mm-hmm.
And cognitive changes, though often mild, are really common. And how they progress looks different from person to person. And so it's hard to plan. It's hard to know what to expect. And especially, you know, since your dad was diagnosed so young, he's going to live with Parkinson's for a really long time. Which, you know, I know he's doing really well right now, and that's wonderful. But I'm curious if you guys have talked with him and with others in your family about some of the scary stuff that could come up in the future and sort of what expectations are for family roles, or how you want to deal with any big changes that come up.
I think we're very lucky to have our stepmom, because she currently would be my father's primary caregiver and does an excellent job helping him every day. But as the child who lives the closest, I know that if anything were to change or happen, that I would be right there to help step in. And it is a conversation that we don't have often with him, but he has brought it up before. So it's just something to definitely be aware of and prepare for as much as you can, even though you can't ever fully prepare for those situations.
Yeah, and in terms of family dynamics and also I'd say to a degree gender roles as well, I think having a father be diagnosed with this disease, it kind of subverts your, I don't know, understanding of how you know what you're raised to believe in terms of you never, as a child, you're not really taught to, you know, worry about your dad, right? You know, dad's going to protect all of us. Dad's going to take care of us. If anything, you're probably raised to care and be more concerned about your mom in a sort of traditional gender role upbringing. So to that point, kind of like to Katie's point, I think that we haven't really tackled these conversations yet because we're still working in that mindset. And I think there's a little bit of unlearning that needs to happen there, because anybody, you know, we should be caring about everybody. It's not just because you're the dad doesn't mean you don't need to be cared for and attended to. And especially with a diagnosis like Parkinson's, it's going to change the not just the family dynamics, but I think also some of the sort of gender roles that we've come to passively accept. And yeah, I'm very grateful to my stepmother for everything she's doing right now. I think that, you know, I don't want to speak necessarily for Katie, but, you know, we're in our 20s, we're trying to build careers of our own and lives of our own. And it's been a balance, to try and figure out how much time should I be giving to my family right now. And I don't want to just completely go out on my own and spend all my time building a life for myself. But at the same time, you can't just, move back home and be there every day, because you're trying to do both. And it's a challenge.
I don't want to make any assumptions. But I'm curious, as you two are sort of navigating the dating pool, if that's something that you're doing, are you thinking about your future with the family? And, Zachary, as you pointed out, your concerns about any genetic pieces of Parkinson's that might put you at, a higher risk of getting it when you are connecting with others.
Mm.
Does that cross your mind in any way? Or does that play into it?
Yeah, all the time. I don't, this is not something I talk about really, even with the people I've dated. And I'm currently in a relationship with someone, and I haven't brought it up to them. They know that my dad has Parkinson's, and I've mentioned in passing my grandfather as well. And whether or not they've also had this thought of, and for clarification, my partner's non-binary, so they use they them pronouns. It's something that concerns me, because I fear about being a burden, which I know is a concern of people who, are diagnosed. Sorry. It's interesting though, because it's all in my head, right? This is not, I don't have a diagnosis. It's not set in stone, but it is absolutely a concern of mine as I get older. But I think what I've seen in my dad and my stepmom is that if you do have someone who loves you, it's not going to matter. They're going to be there for you. And I think whether it's Parkinson's or someone struggling with an identity, the people who love you will love you, no matter what.
I appreciate you digging deep into such a sensitive topic and getting really vulnerable.
Yeah, no problem.
This is all, it can get really heavy. Katie, I don't want to assume that you have something to say or nothing to say, but I want to make space in case you want to jump in.
Just back on the family roles and planning for everything. My boyfriend and I recently bought a house in January, and I specifically wanted to buy one that was closer to my father in case at any point I did need to step in as a caregiver. So I made sure that we were close enough by that I could be there if he needed me to be there, but that way I still had my independence and my freedom to kind of build my own life and have my own home and start that chapter for myself while still being there for my family when they need me.
I think a lot of people on the outside don't think about the future that consciously don't think about, oh gosh, if I'm needed, I want to be available. Having to balance, the desire for independence with the willingness and, sort of the expectation of yourself that you will be there if your family needs you. And I think, especially because you two have had a positive and supportive experience around your identities and all of the intricacies that come with that. I'm not surprised that you guys are being thoughtful. I imagine that this is a challenge for a lot of young folks who have loved ones living with Parkinson's or other, chronic progressive diseases. Are there is there anything that comes to mind that you would want other members of the LGBTQ+ community to understand about Parkinson's disease?
I think for myself, what I would just want people to understand about Parkinson's is that it's a lot more than just the tremors. It's a lot more than just what you see on the surface. There's a lot cognitively that changes as well. So I would just want others to try to educate themselves on all of the intricacies of Parkinson's and what it includes, so that way they're prepared for it and educated on it.
And what about sort of the flip side of that? Is there anything you would want the Parkinson's community to understand about other folks who are, sort of like your family, where there are people who are part of the Parkinson's community, as well as those who are part of the LGBTQ+ community, and especially folks who, individuals who fall into both categories?
Yeah, I feel like it's important to remember that the LGBTQ community is just that. It's a community. It was built over, decades, if not centuries, of coming together to support one another throughout highs and lows. And I think that for somebody who is diagnosed with Parkinson's and is feeling lost, maybe they come from a family where no one has ever been diagnosed with that before, and they don't know what to do and they feel alone. I think that looking to the LGBTQ community is important, because they'll be able to realize that they're not alone, and there is a community out there within the Parkinson's, the Parkinson's community, that will support them and help them through every step of the way. And I think that that is very reflective of what the LGBTQ+ community has done for so many people for so long. And I think that they can find a similarity in that, a found family.
I definitely agree with that as well. The importance of having a support network, and finding a local Parkinson's group or community, or a local LGBTQ+ community or group, so that way you can have your own support network with you through all of these times.
I really appreciate this conversation, Annie. I think that to talk about the intersection of Parkinson's disease and LGBTQ identity, at first I thought, oh, well, those are kind of different, that there's not really that much in common. But the more we think about it and talk about it, there is a lot to be said. And I think that this is only the start of a conversation. I think there's a lot more, voices that can weigh in on this, and a lot more perspectives that can add to this conversation. So I hope that, our discussion today can encourage more conversation on this topic, and encourage people to talk to one another as well, not just in settings like this, but also within their own families, to their friends and in their social networks, and reach out to people and just be there for one another to have these conversations. They're really, really helpful and very important.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much again for the openness and the willingness to talk about these difficult things. I hope that as time goes on, as you said, we'll have more conversations like this, and the door is open to, for the three of us to come back together and discuss again, and maybe bring some other folks who are living in that intersection between the Parkinson's community and the LGBTQ+ community together again.
All right. Well, thank you so much to Katie and Zach and Annie for sharing. So now we are going to move right along, get to our next set of presenters. It's my privilege to invite Dr. Soren Esvold, and we're going to work on getting him up on the screen in just a moment. Dr. Esvold is going to talk a little bit about LGBTQ+ health generally, and then we're going to have Dr. Roshni Patel, who's going to talk specifically about the effect of Parkinson's therapies on the LGBTQ+ community. Dr. Patel will also talk a little bit about some of the research that she has done in that space. So Dr. Esfold, and I hope I'm saying your name correctly, is a family medicine resident at the Medical College of Georgia at Augusta University. Dr. Esfold, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Annie. Thanks for introducing me. As mentioned earlier, so I'm Dr. Esfold. I do family medicine / primary care here in Georgia. And kind of my quasi specialty that I fell into is LGBTQ medicine / transgender medicine. I'm still a resident. I'm in my second of 3 years. So I have 1 more year of training to go, and then I can fully be out in the world practicing my medicine. But I kind of created my own little niche here at AU because there was nobody kind of catering to the LGBTQ community. So that's what I do. I'm not a neurologist. I don't deal with a lot of Parkinson's patients. And so when I was asked to present and talk to you guys today, I was actually very intimidated because I had never actually thought about the intersection between Parkinson's disease and the LGBTQ community. Obviously it's there, but it's not something that I come into practice with in my everyday practice here. So let me talk to you about kind of what I'm thinking, and I'll tell you a little bit about what I do and a lot about LGBTQ medicine, because that's the majority of what I do. So I like to do a little icebreaker first when I talk to people, because actually I talk to a bunch of the different departments here at Augusta University and do this kind of like cultural competency medicine boot camp for the different departments here on how to effectively treat the LGBTQ community when they come in and they need service from you. So most of you already probably know these, and I know it's probably backwards on your screen. Didn't anticipate that. But I like to run through, does everybody know what all of these letters stand for in the alphabet soup that is the LGBTQ community? And I can't see people, so I'm going to assume that you know some of them. But I like to run through it because if you know, you know, and if you don't know, well, you're going to learn something new. Right, so L stands for lesbian. Most of us know that. That's usually female identifying people. G for gay. That's not just men who sleep with men, but people who identify as gay. B for bisexual. T for transgender. Q, there's 2 of them. First one is questioning. Second one is queer. Okay. I stands for intersex. The A's get a little confusing as well. A stands for asexual. Okay, so we can dive into that in a little bit. And then the other A stands for ally. Okay, so that's everyone who doesn't identify as queer. And then we have P for pansexual. This looks really backwards as it was written, but it's actually 2S. And I like to really highlight that one. That means, or that stands for two-spirit, which is more akin to a Native American form of thinking about gender identities. And it's not just, does not mean LGBTQ to them. It actually means an amalgamation of several spirits inside one body that are male, female, and different. So that's a really cool one to highlight. And then plus adds on as everything else, because there's over 35 different gender identities out there, and people identify all along that spectrum. So if you can think of it not just as LGBTQ or LGBTQ+, that it's a whole spectrum of gender identities depending on how people identify. That's what we see in everyday patients who come and see me. So what are we going to talk about today? I'm going to do a little tiny bit of medicine. I know this isn't like a very medicine forward conversation, but people may be wondering, oh, Dr. Esfold, like you're an LGBTQ doctor. Like, what does that mean exactly? And it means that LGBTQ people need doctors as well. And you don't treat them any way different. Okay, so we're all human beings. All human beings need healthcare, and they need access to healthcare, and they need to be able to be treated when they're sick. So some things that I like to focus on in my practice, I'll kind of break it down for you. Might be a little bit interesting. So in the lesbian community, I have lesbian patients who come and see me. Oftentimes they don't have super consistent care unless they have great healthcare or healthcare insurance. And we'll get into that barrier in a little bit. But one thing I have to be really important about with my lesbian identifying patients is that they're in an increased risk for heart disease. And there's actually a big study that came out by the American Heart Association that showed that due to secondary effects such as metabolic disease and obesity, it puts these women at much greater risk for heart disease and much greater risk for obesity. So I have to screen their like lipid panel to make sure there's not too much cholesterol in their blood. I have to counsel them more about exercise, diet, and how to make a healthier lifestyle so that we don't let our, so that their heart disease doesn't become the actual thing that kills them. Next up, I have the G's, the gays. That's also men who have sex with men, but there's a distinction there because not every male who has sex with men identifies as gay and vice versa. But one thing in that population that I have to be a little bit more cognizant of is that they're at much higher risk for STIs. So I'm going to do an STI screening on almost everyone. We're at a much greater risk for HIV. We know this historically from the big HIV epidemic from the 80s and 90s. And then it's still an ongoing worldwide epidemic that we're still treating. So all of my patients, I'm going to screen them at some point for HIV, regardless of risk factors. But then if they have increased risk factors, we're going to do more screening. And that segues right into PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis. And so that is your once daily pill that protects you from HIV. And so it's my goal to get as many people who are high risk on PrEP as possible. I don't know if you've heard of it or not. The two main PrEP sources are Truvada, which has been around for over a decade, and Descovy, which has been around for under a decade. Almost the same identical pill, but it's a once daily pill that you're going to take to protect yourself to guard against HIV. Now, you always use PrEP with condoms, right? Because it's not going to protect you from STIs or other infections and stuff. But it's a great pill to get everybody on. And right now, only about 25 to 35% of the MSM community is actually on PrEP, when it's upwards of 98 to 100%, 98 to 99% effective. So that's a huge push that I do in my clinic. Next, I have bisexual identifying patients who will come and see me, and you treat them like anybody else. But oftentimes that's a very important stigma that people have with bisexual people, is they say, oh, it's just a phase. It's not a real gender identity. You know, they're just confused. It's not true. They're not confused. It's an actual gender orientation, and they're at an extreme risk for depression. So that's one of the really interesting things. You'll find that in the literature, that their depression rate is much higher than the rest of the LGBTQ community. And so I'm always screening them for depression. I'm doing a PHQ-9 screen where I ask them 9 questions about the depression and see how they rank on that scale. And then I usually link them either with a behavioral health specialist, or we start talking about different drugs that they might need to help with their depression or anxiety, because they usually go hand in hand. And then the transgender community. So this is a large part of my practice. And mostly it's the hormone replacement therapy. It's actually transitioning people from one gender to the next. And this is something, like I said, I kind of fell into it about 3 years ago, and I had a really great mentor, and I just really picked up on it. And in the South, not a lot of people do transgender medicine at all. And so the fact that there's just a few people at my university here who do it really makes us popular with the community. And we have people who travel all the way up to 6 hours to come and see us for their hormone therapy. The cool thing about that is that when you transition someone, it's a 3 to 4 year process. It's a second puberty. So I get to see these patients very consistently over a 3 to 4 year period, which means I'm not just giving them hormones. I'm screening them for all of their regular screenings that they need. I'm giving them all of their regular healthcare that they need. I'm, checking them for depression. I'm checking them all of their routine labs. So that's a really cool thing that I get to do. Speaking of the labs for transgender people, they actually are at an increased risk for having hypercholesterolemia or increased cholesterol. They're at an increased risk for diabetes just from being on such a regular amount of hormones consistently for 3 to 4 years. So that's something I have to also be really cognizant of and do proper counseling on and proper screening for as well. Now, the screenings are also really important for transgender people. A lot of times my colleagues who aren't used to working with the LGBT community will have a transgender patient and they have no idea what to do. Like I'll literally get text messages and say, hey, I have a transgender patient. Do you want to come see them? And I'm like, well, yeah, I'd love to, but you can see them and you can still give excellent care. This is me typing. Because they get so freaked out for a couple of things. Is a lot of people are so afraid to use proper pronouns or even ask someone what their proper pronouns are. I can see on the bottoms of some of your guys' screens, like you list your pronouns out. And I think that's awesome. Because that kind of helps break the ice on just asking someone. But I tell all of my colleagues, just ask them. Ask what your pronouns are and then use them throughout the visit. And if you can't remember, you put it up on your notes that you're typing up the computer, because we all use the computers, in super large lettering. And that's actually been able to help a lot. But I also like to have my colleagues do proper screenings on their transgender patients. So if there's a cervix and you're over 21, they need to get a pap smear at some point, okay? If they have breast tissue, they need to have a breast exam at some point, okay? If there's a prostate, it needs to be checked at some point. So we need to be cognizant that like these are still human bodies that need to be treated like human bodies. So we'll get into, that's kind of like a small overview of what I do. But I love treating this community. They're some of my most fun patients. Interestingly enough, I have maybe one Parkinson's patient, and that's mostly because I work at an academic center, so they all go over to neurology anyways. And so most of my LGBTQ patients are young. They're in their 20s, 30s. My oldest two transgender patients are 65 and 69, and they're actively transitioning, which is really cool because they came out later in life and realized that they can actually do something to help with their gender dysphoria, and that's something I can help with. But one thing that I like to do for everybody in this community, LGBTQ plus IAAQQ, Two-Spirit, is you screen everyone for depression. And that's super important. About half of my work now is dealing with depression in this community and screening them for depression, because behavioral health and mental health is such a big part of this community, and this community is such a high risk for developing depression. So like I mentioned earlier, for if anyone's in healthcare, I do a PHQ-9, which is a basic depression screen, and then I go from there. Unfortunately, linking them to a behavioral health specialist, like a psychologist or a psychiatrist, is difficult in this day and age, right? They're very overwhelmed right now because of COVID, and because mental health is so prevalent in our society right now, a lot of those specialists are completely overwhelmed. So we as primary care docs have to do a lot of the mental health work ourselves. And so we have to become really proficient in what kind of antidepressants we're prescribing, if they're working, if we need to switch them to something else. And then plus other therapy modalities that aren't just giving a pill, because all medication comes with side effects. We don't want to just give pills to people. So that's a big thing of what I do. Let's talk about barriers to care. So I know that was touched on earlier in one of the workshops, but that's such a big part of healthcare in general, and especially not having healthcare in general. And this community is at risk for not having healthcare. One of my clinics that I do is a free clinic. It's a free transgender clinic here in Georgia for anyone who does not have insurance, so they can't afford healthcare. And I think we have some sort of grant / like really great fundraising where we're able to pay for all of their labs. We help people with transportation fees, so like giving them gas cards and stuff so they can come to clinic. And we do a lot of our stuff electronically. We even offer telehealth visits if they're just too far away or they just can't make it in. And that's so important because a lot of people don't have healthcare because they don't have a good job that offers them healthcare. That's the number one way we get healthcare, or they haven't married into healthcare. And I hate that I have to say it that way, but oftentimes people get healthcare through their spouse because their spouse has a job that will provide it for both of them. And so this community, if they don't have either of those two options, what are they going to do? Urgent care is not going to treat all of your things. You can't use urgent care as primary care. You can't use an ER as primary care, right? Because that's just a get in and get out, fix the problem right then and there. They're not going to fix your diabetes. So oftentimes these problems will go unchecked for years. And so it's really important for us to get people linked with good healthcare. Another barrier to good care is provider knowledge. So kind of like I touched on earlier, you go and you see a healthcare provider and they see that you're an LGBTQ person and they shut down mentally because they don't know how to integrate that into their practice, which is really unfortunate because it's not much different. So a lot of what I do is just, I do like a big presentation to the other specialists, be like, this is how you just do normal screening for people, normal routine screenings for like skin cancer, for heart disease, for diabetes, for high blood pressure. All of those still count, and you can still give those to your people. Oftentimes though, I'll see like a transgender patient who will transition from seeing a different provider to have finally found me, which is really great. And that other provider has clearly had zero idea how to transition them and put them on proper hormones so that they can transition to their other gender. And I'll see these like crazy labs that make zero sense to me, and they've been on hormones for years, just kind of just ricocheting through their body. That's really tough because these providers haven't just taken the time to do the proper research. We as doctors know that if we don't know the answer, we have to look it up and we have to find the correct answer. And a lot of providers don't take that time to learn about transgender medicine, to learn about LGBTQ medicine. And unfortunately, these patients don't get great care because of it. I already touched on proper screenings, so we can skip that one. So kind of like, what can you do? How can we break down these barriers? I don't know if you guys have noticed my badge tag, but like, one, there's rainbows everywhere. And that helps. So like, I have this little rainbow pin that has been super helpful because when I see people down in the ER, you wouldn't believe how many patients have said, or they've noticed it and they'll say like, I like your pin, you know, and it's kind of like, oh, they know that I know that they know. And so they automatically feel more comfortable now. And then I can ask them those questions like, who's your partner? Are you sexually active? Are they cisgender or transgender? Like, what kind of sexual activity are you having? And I can better provide more tailored care for you. The other really cool thing we did here at AU is, I don't know if you can see this little rainbow poking out here, but we invented, and by we, I mean I invented this badge tag that kind of pokes, it's meant to poke out from behind your other badges because we have way too many, but it's a great identifier for people to let you, so that other people know that you are a safe space. And so I'll have patients in the hospital or in the ER or in clinic who will see the rainbow and they'll say something, they'll be like, oh, I like your badge. And it makes, like I said, it provides a safe space for them that they can kind of let down their guard and be more honest and upfront about what kind of healthcare they need. We took this one step further, and I broke it down by kind of the most basic gender types. There's, you know, for the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community, and what screenings physicians should be doing and what labs they should be ordering. So that if my colleagues, again, they blank, all they have to do is say, oh, I have a bisexual patient in front of me, I should do a PHQ-9 screen, and I should order basic labs. It's all right here. And then the back side of it is all for transgender resources. So they can look at it and say like, oh, literally it's like step one, ask what pronouns they use. And then it gives examples of pronouns in case you blanked on your grammar. So you can do that. And then it tells like what screening guidelines to use. If they're on hormone therapy, what labs to order and what hormones to renew. Because it would be useless if one of my patients saw one of my colleagues for like an HRT visit and the colleague did nothing. That's a waste of the appointment for the patient and for them. And then also at the very bottom, it also lists like other resources. So if you don't trust the badge, you can say, oh, I can go to glamma.org or the trevor.project.org, or I can refer the patients to there so they can help kind of answer some of their questions. I saw somebody just chatted, it popped up on my screen. Where can you get these badges? We have them at Family Medicine and we have them in the hospital if you want to just like chat me on Messenger. And then if anybody else is like super interested in them, I can always mail them out. My department printed like literally like 1,000 and I mail them out to people who really want them. But it's a great tool. It's been very successful. And then we just pass them out to all the major departments at AU, and we pass them out to like nurses, to CNAs, and to front desk people. Anyone who is patient facing got a badge. And so like I always keep a stack on me and I just hand them out to like the nurses stations and stuff. And it's great because I've seen probably 40% of our employees here at the university with them on. And I'll comment, I'll be like, oh, I like your rainbow tag. And I've had people actually like break it down and explain to me exactly what it is, which is a really cool way to see if they understood how to use it. And it's gone over great. The other thing that I thought we should touch on is changes in medicine. So medicine is always evolving, it's always changing, but how about LGBTQ medicine in medicine? And so that's actually, it's having its moment a little bit right now. People are starting to become more cognizant that the LGBTQ population is still a very valid population that needs to finally get treatment instead of being stigmatized. Unfortunately, there still is a lot of discrimination, especially towards my transgender patients. Not so much here, but generally that's what the statistics show. And so it's important that we try and break down those stigma barriers, that we're very upfront and very welcoming is a better way to put it, that we've created safe spaces in our offices and our clinics to show that like we accept you as a patient and we love you and we want to give you the best form of treatment possible. So there's big changes that have been happening in medicine, especially now. Like one of my biggest things, if you talk to other physicians, like they were so used to just talking about HIV whenever they had a gay person or a bisexual person in front of them. And this was because of the HIV epidemic. But now that those conversations are changing, not from just HIV prevention, but to actual healthcare prevention or preventative needs in general. So I thought that was really cool. The last thing I'm going to kind of touch on before I'm going to let Dr. Roshni speak, because I don't want to take up all of the time, is just resources. So if you're on here and you're like, great, like I would love to be able to find out more resources so I can learn more about LGBTQ medicine, or if I have patients, where can I refer them, stuff like that. There's a couple, 3 main resources that I really like. One is the GLAMA website, and that's the Gay Lesbian Medical Association. They actually have a directory on there that you can like input your zip code into. And once you do that, it'll bring up all of the providers kind of nearest to you. So that's super helpful. And you can always like reach out to people and they'll help you find you a provider in the area. The Trevor Project is great. They have a couple pages. They do a lot of advocacy in general, but they have a great medical section with resources for all ages, for the elderly population, which is still a very valid population within the LGBTQ community that often does not get talked about. And I've done entire lectures about it, but have resources for them. They have resources for LGBTQ youth. So you're young and and you need help, finding medical care or just resources to help pay for medicine. And then they have a whole list of other resources, both nationally and locally. And then the third one is always the HRC, Human Rights Campaign. They have a great medical page as well that they can help you find other resources for as well. So like I said, the kind of big takeaway points that I would love for you to take away is, one, if you're a provider, do not be afraid to treat your LGBTQ people, okay? They're just like regular people. They have normal human bodies that need to be treated as well. If you're a patient and you're not comfortable with your provider, break down those barriers, present them with information that will help you receive the best care. Oftentimes my patients will talk to me about like, oh, I feel like I should receive an anal pap smear. Let's talk about that. And I'll talk to them all about it. Or my transgender patients will, say like, oh, well, I heard like my friends were getting this done, or, this is a different standard of care. Let's talk about this. And we break it down and talk about their healthcare together. And it's more of a conversation. And it's not just a unidirectional from me being like, this is what we're going to do to treat you today. If that makes sense. So I hope you enjoyed that little snippet. Are there any questions or anything? As you can tell, I'm very passionate about this, and I'm used to giving like an hour-long lecture. So I've been trying to condense it down into like the highlights for you guys. Are there any questions out there? Oops, is there a moderator out there?
Thank you. Yes. So thank you so much. And Dr. Esfold, if you're able to stay on a little bit longer, I would love to give people some time to maybe think about their questions.
Sure.
And then I'll bring up you and Dr. Patel as soon as she touches on her key points. I'd love to bring you on camera together so that you guys can kind of tag team those questions. And I know Bill asked a question, but I think I'm going to save that to the Q&A if that's okay, just so that we can get to Dr. Patel, but I'll note that in my Q&A list. So
perfect.
Now I would like, okay, awesome. Now I'd like to invite our next presenter to join me on camera. Dr. Roshni Patel is a movement disorders neurologist at the Jesse Brown VA Medical Center and has an adjunct appointment at Rush. Dr. Patel is going to speak more specifically about Parkinson's disease and the LGBTQ+ community. So thank you, Dr. Patel, for being here with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm actually going to share my screen if that's okay. I did prepare a couple slides. It's not to make it too formal, but only because if I don't have some structure, I'll just ramble. So just bear with me here while I pull them up. Okay, so yeah, I'm Roshni Patel here in Chicago, and then I was tasked to talk about where we've been and where we're heading in terms of PD research, treatment, and care in the LGBTQ community, which is a huge topic. But I'll just try to highlight a few things. So I wanted to just go over the big picture in terms of PD, although this was already touched on, I think, previously. But just in terms of like when we as neurologists see patients with Parkinson's or see people with Parkinson's, we think about kind of where they are in terms of the disease course, and not everybody experiences all the different elements of these the symptoms that are shown here. And so I don't put this here to scare you, but I just wanted to go over, you know, all the breadth of things we can see when we're treating people with Parkinson's. So oftentimes people have non-motor symptoms, which many times precede the onset of motor symptoms, and they include things like constipation, sleep dysfunction, sometimes blood pressure and urinary problems, mood disorders like depression and anxiety. And then, of course, the classic motor features include things like slowness, stiffness, tremor, difficulty with walking and balance. And then, you know, typically later on, we think of it as being kind of a later in the course, people can have issues with swallowing, cognition, sometimes hallucinations, things of that nature. So not everybody experiences all these things, but these are just some of the considerations in terms of the kind of the big picture of Parkinson's disease. And then in terms of treatments, again, just kind of a broad overview of Parkinson's treatments in general. You know, we have medication treatments for these things. So we have medicines to treat the motor symptoms of Parkinson's, which classically, you know, dopamine-based medicines such as levodopa is what we use. But we need to use sometimes medicines to treat the non-motor symptoms of Parkinson's, such as, you know, depression, anxiety, things of that nature. Exercise and rehabilitation is a key portion or a key part of the treatment of Parkinson's. So, and in fact, you know, even though we don't have a cure or a disease modifying treatment in Parkinson's, you know, some studies show that people who exercise more actually have a slower rate of Parkinson's progression. So exercise is really important and something we emphasize. And then we work sometimes with physical therapists, occupational therapists, and other folks in the rehabilitation arena to work on that. Sometimes patients need surgical or advanced treatments. So not everybody needs that, but some people may need that. And that can include things like deep brain stimulation, focused ultrasound. There's a procedure in which people can have a continuous infusion of levodopa through the gut. So these are sort of like advanced or specialized treatments, which some people may need. You know, social engagement and stimulation. You know, I recently added this to kind of this PD treatment summary slide that I've used in presentations before, because I think we're realizing the importance of this during the pandemic, especially when people have become more isolated and you know, so this is important for everybody in general, but I think particular people with Parkinson's disease can be prone to having worsening of their motor and non-motor symptoms when they're isolated or you know, or lonely and things of that nature. So that's, I think, a really important part of the treatment. And then kind of multidisciplinary care. So, you know, as a neurologist, you know, I'm kind of focusing on certain things, but I work with other folks, you know, folks like Dr. Estevald, you know, the primary care doctor, and psychiatrist or psychologist, urologist, you know, other medical specialties to treat other non-motor symptoms. So urologist if there are urinary symptoms, gastroenterologist if there's constipation, cardiologist if there's blood pressure issues, and lots of other kind of folks who are members of the team. So these are kind of broad overview of Parkinson's, how we treat Parkinson's disease in general. So what about Parkinson's disease care in the LGBTQ community? What do we know about it? The answer is not much. So if a year ago, if you went to PubMed, PubMed is our archive or the biggest archive of medical research. So if you went to PubMed and if you typed in Parkinson's disease and the term sexual and gender minority, which is kind of the research term for LGBTQ, if you put those two terms in, then you would get 0 results a year ago. If you put those two terms in now, you will get 1 result, which is this paper that I've shown here. And so, and this paper was written by some colleagues of mine, and basically they are, in this paper, they're pointing out the lack of research in the movement disorders and in the Parkinson's community for LGBT folks. So really, unfortunately, there's not much formal research or and there's not much formal data that we have about this, but that's changing. So let's talk about that, and let's talk about reasons for that, and then how it's changing. So why is that? So there's lots of different reasons, kind of barriers to doing research about Parkinson's in the LGBTQ community, but I'll highlight a couple of key reasons. The first is inconsistent data collection about sexual orientation and gendered identity, also known as SOGI, in our clinical, administrative, and research databases. So, for example, when you go to your appointment and you register for the first time at your institution, the person who's registering you usually collects your information about your name, your date of birth and age, your sex, which usually refers to legal sex. Oftentimes they collect information about race and ethnicity, and sometimes they collect other information about education and things of that nature. But until very recently, sexual orientation and gender identity information was not collected. In 2015, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, which is a big federal institution, they said, hey, people who have electronic medical records need to put a field in to collect, so that we can at least try to collect it. They didn't require that everybody has to collect it, but they required that people have to put a field in if anybody who has an electronic medical record, which is most institutions now use electronic medical records. They now have to have at least a field in where this data can be collected about sexual orientation and gender identity. So that was back in 2015 that requirement or that guideline was put into place. And so over the last few years, institutions have slowly been changing their electronic medical records and incorporating this field so that now we can at least start to try collecting this. However, it's not required, because of that, it's collected inconsistently across institutions. So one institution might prioritize this and might train their staff to collect it, and so they might have very high rates of documenting this, and other institutions may not even mention it to their staff, and so they don't, half the doctors there don't even know that this is something that they can put in the chart. So and in fact, that latter example was the case at Rush when I was a fellow there. And so I did a small study when I was a fellow last year at Rush, where I wanted to just see what is the frequency of sexual orientation and gender identity collection in our movement disorders clinic. How frequently is that information documented in the chart? So I looked at all the patients that we saw in a 4-week period in our movement disorders clinic, and the frequencies are listed here. So 43% of the patients had sexual orientation documented, and 32% had gender identity documented in the fields. Interestingly, in most of those cases, that information was put in by the patient through the electronic patient portal. So in fact, most of the time, we as providers or as administrators were not collecting that information from the patients putting it in themselves. And then amongst those the patients who did, for which we did have that information, 4.5% of the patients in our clinic identified as sexual and gender minorities. So that kind of reflects the prevalence of this of sexual and gender minority identity in general, and it kind of reinforces that it's important information to collect, and it's information that people will probably be willing to share as long as we start collecting it more consistently. So this is improving. It's improving slowly. So now I work at the VA, and the VA is, of course, notoriously kind of slow to adopt things sometimes. But in fact, earlier this year, we now they now created sexual orientation and gender identity fields in our VA electronic medical record chart. So now we can, now we'll be able to start collecting that. So I think things are changing, but they are of course a little bit slow to change. And in order to change this even more, I think more will be required, including, training staff and training providers about the importance of collecting this, figuring out what's the best way to collect it. Is it best for patients to just put it in themselves through sort of a indirect format, through an online portal, or is it best if the provider asks people? And so there's a lot of things to think about with this, but I think it's something that, hopefully there's forward more momentum with. Another issue that I will bring up is the lack of diversity in research and in terms of research subjects or participants in research. And so historically, this is probably true for most studies, medical studies or research clinical studies in general, but particularly amongst, it's kind of the big studies in Parkinson's disease. Historically, it's been kind of a very homogeneous population that has been studied. So typically mostly white patients and mostly men, and the distribution of men being out of proportion to the frequency of Parkinson's, because of course Parkinson's disease is more common in men than women, but typically in studies that distribution is exaggerated and men are even more so overrepresented. So this is a problem that people are recognizing, including, foundations and funding sources like Parkinson's Foundation, like the Michael J. Fox Foundation and other foundations who are funding research in Parkinson's disease. And in fact, now many of these funding agencies are now prioritizing studies that have plans for diverse recruitment. And so it's actually part of your research proposal is that you don't have to just include your inclusion criteria, what types of patients you want to include. You have to actually include a plan of how you're going to include diverse patients. So I think there is some effort now to improve this, but again, there's still a lot of work that can be done, including of course in Parkinson's research. So what are some issues that folks in the LGBT community may face who have Parkinson's disease? And I'm focusing here on LGBTQ patients with Parkinson's, not as much on caregivers, like how I think Zachary and Caitlin talked about that perspective. So I'm focusing here on like LGBTQ patients with Parkinson's. And so, because of the lack of research, of course, much of this is sort of just ideas and speculation about things that may be important, but, we need to do a lot more work to understand these things better. But these are some of the things that I would think about and that I think that would be interesting to consider. One is motor and non-motor symptom burden in LGBTQ folks versus non-LGBTQ folks. So of course, in the non-PD literature, that some of which Dr. Estival reviewed, we know that elderly patients have just elderly patients or elderly people in general who are quote sexual and gender minority patients or LGBTQ patients, they report higher rates of cognitive symptoms or cognitive impairment compared to non-SGM people. And so, since cognitive impairment is a part of Parkinson's and can be a non-motor symptom that can be very debilitating in Parkinson's, one wonders whether, the rates of cognitive impairment could be different amongst LGBTQ folks versus not. Some other considerations are, rates of anxiety, depression. We know in general, LGBTQ folks experience higher rates of anxiety, depression, and suicidality. And so, since of course these are very common non-motor symptoms of Parkinson's, one wonders could there be a difference, or maybe possibly higher rates amongst LGBTQ folks with Parkinson's. And then this has also already been alluded to. There's been some reports that there's higher rates of smoking and cardiovascular risk factors, especially amongst lesbians. And so in Parkinson's disease, when people who have higher vascular disease or vascular comorbidities or vascular risk factors tend to have worse motor and non-motor symptoms. So one wonders if particularly lesbians with Parkinson's disease, may they have higher rates of vascular disease, and could that correlate with clinical symptoms? So those are a few considerations. It's not all negative though. So another thing I was thinking about when I was putting this together is, could there be perhaps increased resilience and increased coping mechanisms amongst LGBTQ folks with Parkinson's disease? Because just because of all the barriers and the, the things that, that we've overcome over the years and over our lives. And so, in some ways could that be a protective factor that could, maybe that could actually be a benefit for people with Parkinson's disease. In an effort to try to understand some of these things a little bit better, one study that I'm working on that it's kind of ongoing, we're still analyzing the data right now, so unfortunately I can't share any preliminary results, but we worked with the Fox Insights study, which is a study through the Michael J. Fox Foundation, and it's a survey study. So basically, people who enroll, that's people with Parkinson's disease and people without Parkinson's disease, and so really anybody can enroll, and you just enroll online. It's all done online, and basically periodically every 3 months or 6 months you get a survey about different in which they ask you about your motor symptoms, your non-motor symptoms, and different things related to Parkinson's. And so we put out a survey. Unfortunately, they did not collect any information about sexual orientation or gender identity when they put the study together. But we put out a survey last year where we actually asked participants about their sexual orientation and gender identity, and over 3,000 participants actually replied. And so now we're in the process of kind of cross-referencing that with the responses on the other surveys that those participants have done, including the motor and non-motor symptoms, to try to understand a little bit better, is there a difference, at least in this cohort, is there a difference between SGM, the sexual and gender minority, non-sexual and gender minority patients with Parkinson's in terms of motor and non-motor symptom burden, things of that nature. So that's underway. Hopefully we'll be able to report that and share that soon. Some other considerations, there's a lot of different things that we can discuss, and many things have been discussed already, but caregiver issues and advanced care planning. So in particular, folks in our community, we have different support system structures compared to others, right? So we may or may not be married to our partners. We may or may not have biological children or children at all. And so our support system and our support structures are look different. And so that's important to consider, when I'm, as a neurologist, when I'm taking care of people with Parkinson's disease, I follow them for years and I get to know them very well and their caregivers very well. And so it's important to kind of understand those relationships and not just assume kind of the quote heteronormative structure of that the person has a spouse and kids and stuff, and so and we often say like our families are kind of our chosen family sometimes, where we consider close friends or partners as family, as opposed to spouses, parents, children, things of that nature. And so I think that's something that's important to keep in mind. And then also it's important to keep in mind in terms of documentation and legal issues. So for example, in some states, for example, the people will automatically assume your next of kin is your parents or your children, and in some cases you may that may not be the case, and so you want to make sure that you have documentation, things like healthcare directives and advanced care planning documentation, where you actually outline and specify who is the person you want to make healthcare decisions for you, so on and so forth. Okay. And then the last thing I'll mention is long-term care facilities and senior care facilities. Sometimes people with Parkinson's, do end up kind of living in these type of places, and they are notoriously, they're kind of notoriously places that are kind of unwelcoming for diverse populations, including LGBTQ folks. And so because of fear of discrimination by staff or other issues, oftentimes people describe going back in the closet, not feeling comfortable talking about themselves or their partners or their life. And it can be challenging environments. And so, this is an area where I think there needs to be a lot of improvement. There are sort of individual things that are coming up. So for example, there is such a thing, there is this entity like LGBTQ plus friendly housing. So one example of that, I just put a screenshot of it up here. It's here in Chicago, we have a community-based organization called the Center on Halsted. And so they actually built the first LGBTQ kind of senior housing in Chicago. And that's the sole focus of the housing. And so I think that efforts like this are great, but I think that in order to make an impact, there needs to be probably more widespread training and kind of improvement amongst all long-term care facilities and senior living facilities in order to kind of make changes that are more widespread. So bottom lines, we don't know much about LGBTQ plus health in Parkinson's disease because we haven't done much research on this until very recently, and hopefully more will be coming out soon. And I think programs like this are just an indication that this is now something that we're recognizing as important. And so I think there'll be more. We'll learn more as we go, and then hopefully we'll learn more as we collect SOGI, sexual orientation and gender identity data more consistently, and we prioritize diverse recruitment for studies. And then some special considerations in Parkinson's care amongst the LGBTQ community may include things like, differences in motor and non-motor symptom burden, caregiver support system and structure, fostering inclusive environments and culture, especially in the long-term care facilities, and then, hopefully trying to understand barriers to care and disparities more in the future as well. So that's all I got.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Patel. We're going to invite Dr. Espel to join us again on camera. And we're just going to talk through a few questions that we've received. So the first question I'm going to ask came from an audience member. And Dr. Espel, this was directed to you. Can you elaborate on diabetes and HRT? What would that be?
Yeah, so that was a finding that came from the American Heart Association in a study published in 2021 by Caceres and group. And they found that being on HRT for the transgender community puts you at an increased risk for diabetes. So it was important to keep, or to at least get a screen for your hemoglobin A1C, or if you have other risk factors, especially in your family, that's another reason to get screened for it. And that's from being on estrogen or testosterone.
So much. And then Dr. Patel, this question came in, have you performed research on the benefits of care farms, working farms designed for persons with cognitive impairment?
Oh, no, that's very interesting. I don't know much about that. Yeah, I'd definitely be interested to learn about that. I think in general, there is a increased interest in kind of non-pharmacologic treatments for Parkinson's, symptoms, motor and non-motor symptoms. So like, for example, I worked on a project as a fellow where we looked at, people who participated in a boxing program. And like, we looked at how that impacted their motor symptoms and also non-motor symptoms, including cognition. And then I have a colleague also who's looking at the effect of music therapy on cognition and mood symptoms in Parkinson's disease. So I think that a lot of these things are kind of part of the same theme of like, are there strategies that we can use that are not just medications to treat PD symptoms, both motor and non-motor symptoms, oftentimes non-motor symptoms are harder to treat compared to motor symptoms, right? So I think that I would be interested to learn more about care farms. I think there's probably a lot of different interesting things out there that could help. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and I know at the Parkinson's Foundation, we have a social engagement series online that you can join every month. So, it's through our PD Health at Home virtual program series.
Oh, cool.
Okay, so I guess the next question could really be for both of you. And I think we had some questions that, were pretty much, let me just pull this question up. Can you guys think of any treatment protocols, whether it's, and maybe Dr. Patel, this is as a neurologist more for you, but can you think of any Parkinson's specific treatment protocols that would be different if you were treating a member of the LGBTQ plus community? Any known contraindicated medications, for example?
Yeah, that's a good point. And to my knowledge, there are no contraindicated medications. So for example, like if there's a patient who's on hormone replacement therapy or like any other gender affirming treatment, that does not interact with most of the Parkinson's treatments that we use. Yeah. Right. So I can't think of any contraindications. And for the most part, I would say all of our treatments, both medicine treatments, surgical treatments, all of our treatments, not non-pharmacologic treatments, I think they would apply to both LGBTQ folks and non-LGBTQ folks. And so I would say there's probably just more nuances maybe in terms of things to consider, like for example, when we do an evaluation for deep brain stimulation, if a person with Parkinson's may benefit from deep brain stimulation, which is a big surgery and involves a lot of rehab and programming and follow-up and things like that. So for that surgery, one of the things that we consider when we're thinking about whether this person would be a good candidate is what is their support system. It's actually one of the bigger factors that we consider. Who's their partner that they're who's the person who's going to be there. And so I think that again, I wouldn't say that anybody is disqualified, but I would just say that it's just important for us to recognize as providers that the support system of LGBTQ patients may be different, and so we need to it's beholden on us to investigate that, ask them about that, because we shouldn't just assume just because they don't have a spouse or something like that they wouldn't be a good candidate, right? And so they might have a partner, or they might have close-knit set of friends and who are going to be their perfectly adequate support system. So I think it's more like kind of nuances like that in which this comes up, but I don't think there's no contraindicated treatments or anything like that I can think of. Yeah.
That's great. And then again, this next question could really be for either of you. I know Cheryl earlier in her presentation talked about rehabilitative therapies and how members of this community seem to be more resistant to utilizing those rehabilitative therapies. So what advice, I guess, would you give? I mean, we know that Parkinson's disease is so complex. It doesn't require one provider. It requires really a team of providers. So what would your advice be to somebody who's been diagnosed with Parkinson's and may not have explored these additional therapies?
Yeah, I think first of all, the treatment and therapy always is individualized for the person, right? So everybody's different, and sometimes you may not need certain things at some stages of the disease. You may need things at other stages. So so that just always individualizing things, and also a person's preferences might be different. So if somebody, like sometimes I'm like trying to get people to do more cardiovascular exercise, and they're like, I hate running. So then I'm like, okay, well, find something else that's will increase your heart rate and make you sweat a little bit. It doesn't have to be running. Like cardiovascular doesn't have to equal. So I think maybe just talking to the person, getting to know them, figuring out why they're resistant. Maybe they're resistant because they work with a physical therapist, and the physical therapist like said a homophobic statement. So they're like, I don't want to do any physical therapy. So I think just more so trying to understand why and really talk to the person. It's probably different for everybody why they may want to do something or may not want to do something, and then just working with them, kind of like Dr. Espel said, it's not just a cookie cutter treatment for everybody. It's like you need to individualize a treatment for the person and just work together as a team. It's not like you have to do this, so yeah. So I would say that's and so as from the maybe the patient perspective, I would say maybe if your doctor says, oh, you have to do this and you don't want to do it, maybe try to think about why you want to do it. They might not ask you, they might not say, why don't you want to do it? They'll probably just write on their note, non-compliant patient, and then you'll, or something like that. Oh, I recommended physical therapy. Patient is declining physical therapy. And then they won't even ask, and so maybe from your perspective, if you want to advocate for yourself, you can, if there's certain things that you're more or less interested in, I would maybe even try to think about why and try to discuss that and engage with your provider and try to discuss it with them. And maybe you can find some middle ground or something like that. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. I didn't see any other questions come in, but I really appreciate your time today. The information was really, I mean, just invaluable, and hopefully will help us all, be better informed about some of these issues. So thank you so much. And as I mentioned, we will be sharing the recording to this program, and Dr. Patel, with your permission, also your slides, so we can talk about that offline. But thank you both so much. So now we're gonna move right along. So we still, believe it or not, we still have a couple of great presentations to look forward to. So, feel free to take a stretch break as needed, but stay with us, because our next presenter I'm very excited about is Dr. Matthew Kreidel. Dr. Kreidel is an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Health Behavior at the Medical College of Georgia at Augusta University. Dr. Kreidel has been an instrumental part of the planning for this program and will be speaking today about cultural competence and humility, necessities in Parkinson's healthcare. So Dr. Kreidel, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. And thank you for that kind introduction, Annie. Good morning, everyone. Like Annie said, I'm Matt Kreidel. I'm a psychologist at the Medical College of Georgia at AU. Dr. Esfold and I actually work closely together. Like Annie said, I'm going to be talking about cultural competence and cultural humility and why these are necessary in Parkinson's healthcare. And I'll just say, I hope you don't mind, I'm a little dressed down for Saturday. I'm wearing my Y'all Means All shirt for, just supporting LGBTQ people here in the South. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And hopefully that's coming through. Looks like my video got frozen. Andy, can you just verbally confirm that I'm still coming through?
I see your face and I hear you, but I do not yet see your slides. So I can pull those up if just
things kind of got frozen on me, unfortunately. So
okay, let me see what
oh, there we go. Let's see. Is it sharing now?
Yes, now I see them.
Okay. Just took a minute to get there, so hopefully it keeps going. Tell me if anything bumps. So let's get started. So just wanted to acknowledgements and disclosures real quick. I wanted to highlight thanks to the Parkinson's Foundation and really specifically Annie Brooks and Annie Long and all others who helped put this together, and Martha Ann Tudor as well, just being really instrumental in the organization and making sure that this presentation could be put forth for you all. No conflicts to disclose, so we'll keep going. So today, a couple of things that we're going to talk about. We're going to define culture as a concept and talk about what does it mean to define our own cultural identities. We're going to compare and contrast the difference between cultural competence and cultural humility. We'll identify some unique cultural factors of LGBTQ identity, Parkinson's identity, and the intersection of both, which other presenters have also covered really fabulously. And finally, describe how do we practice cultural humility in our work with patients and care partners and in our own lives. So culture is a lot of different things. And I think when we first think of culture, certain things come to mind, right? It's holidays like Christmas or Cinco de Mayo. It's food. We think of what is Indian food versus other food cultures, games, language, Spanish, English, right? And this is maybe some of the stuff that immediately comes to mind when we think about culture. But in reality, this concept of a cultural iceberg, it is so much more than just these things. That culture is also the way in which we communicate, the rules we have, even if we're not conscious of them, about eye contact, about being close to someone or even touching people. It's ideas about courtesy and friendship and cleanliness and beauty. How do we approach our elders? How do we approach physicians versus nurses versus other patients? How do we think about death and what it means for us? And how do we approach decision-making and how that decision-making relates to those around us? And these are all things that, even if we don't think about it, are showing up constantly in our lives, and particularly so in healthcare and the ways we interact with those around us as we receive our healthcare, as we provide healthcare, and as we make choices about our healthcare. And so just as we go through this, I would encourage you to think about all the different ways that culture shows up in your life and all these different, experiences you have with healthcare and going, well, how does culture play a role in that? When we talk about identity, there's this fabulous model called the addressing model, and it really covers a broad spectrum of identities, but it's not the end all be all. Addressing stands for age, disability developmental, so disabilities that we may be born with, like intellectual disability or ADHD, but also disability acquired, which we might consider Parkinson's to fall under, but we'll talk about that later if you do consider that a disability. It's things like religion and spirituality, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, middle class, lower class, upper class. Of course, sexual orientation being relevant to our discussion today. Indigenous heritage, national origin, and gender. And so, again, this is not comprehensive, right? But this is many ways in which we have different identities. And the bubbles on the right also show other ways in which identity and culture shows up in our life, our political affiliation, our job, our education, our marital status, all things that we've been talking about today. So I think it's important, as your presenter, to state some of my own identities. I'm 30 years old. I don't have any developmental or acquired disabilities. I was raised Catholic, but don't really identify with a religion now. And I'm already finding I'm still finding new ways in which that influences me. I am white and of a upper to middle class socioeconomic status, identify as gay and not of indigenous heritage. I was born in America and still live in America, and I identify as male. And I feel it's important for me to state these, not only to give examples of how we apply these identities, but because this is the frame and lens from which I'm discussing these topics today, that I am a gay male, but it doesn't make me the expert on all the LGBTQ community. I don't have Parkinson's, but I do work with Parkinson's patients. I come as a psychologist, not a physician. And so just taking a chance to reflect on your own identities and have they evolved over time, right? I highlighted that I was raised Catholic, but I'm not Catholic anymore. And that, that influences things for me. So just think about how all these different identities influence the way you see the world and the way your cultures show up in your life and the lives of your patients and care partners. So these ideas of cultural competence and cultural humility. Cultural competence is something that is I think, thankfully getting more infused throughout healthcare. And this understanding that to be culturally competent, we have to gain cultural knowledge. We have to know cultures different than ourselves. What are they like? What strengths do they bring to the table? And we also have to develop cultural self-awareness, something we're doing already today about what is my own culture? What are my own identities? And how does it influence the way I view and interact with others? But a more developing topic, and one that I hope continues to get infused throughout healthcare, is this concept of cultural humility. So cultural competence is a foundation, it is necessary, but to be culturally humble means that we acknowledge systems of power and that we are willing to hold those systems accountable, that it is not enough to just know that people of color experience racism, that LGBTQ people experience discrimination, but to understand that those discriminations come from systems, that they are infused into our society, they are infused into our systems of healthcare, and that we have a responsibility from whatever perspective we come from to try and address those power imbalances. How can I use my own understanding of my culture? How can I use my understanding of other cultures, this foundation of cultural competence, to address these power imbalances? Cultural humility ultimately is about recognizing that we don't know everything, and that we can build a strong foundation of cultural competence, but in reality, we have to be humble in the way in which we approach interacting with those different than ourselves. And we have to be humble in approaching our own identity paths and go, I have more to learn all the time, and that's okay. And I can come to the table best as I can. And we do that through developing a desire to know culture better, through practicing skills that help us communicate and interact with cultures different than our own, and to ultimately engage in encounters, to not just build the knowledge and the skills, but then to go forth and interact with others different than ourselves. And doing this over time is how we continue to build cultural competence and cultural humility. So just wanting to talk briefly about some cultural factors that relate to LGBTQ identity. Being LGBTQ is an umbrella. So this umbrella down in the bottom right corner, queer is a term that many individuals may associate negatively to say that someone is a queer or is acting queer. But it's been a term that's been reclaimed by much of the LGBTQ community, that it is a very umbrella term to represent the entire, as Dr. Usfold said, alphabet soup of labels, of which there are an infinite number, constantly expanding. It's hard to put a number on it. And that this encompasses both sexualities, being lesbian, gay, bisexual, others like demisexual, sapiosexual, pansexual, but it also encompasses gender, being trans, being non-binary, and that these are not the same things, but they are all one big community. And I think that's important to highlight because unfortunately, there are people in the LGBTQ community who say, well, we don't want the T part, we just want the LGB part. And we can't do that, we have to be a family. So it's important to recognize that we all fall under this umbrella, but they're diverse subcultures. They're not a monolith. And that the experiences of a gay man is different than the experience of a lesbian woman. The experience of a bisexual individual is different than the experience of a non-binary individual. And to recognize that those experiences can be different and not presuming that just because you've met one gay man like me, that my experience and my behaviors and my life is the same as another person, right? It's important to also note, and this was in our last presentation so well described, that LGBTQ people experience significant health disparities. There are much higher rates of illness for the LGBTQ community. LGBTQ individuals are 2 times more likely to experience mental health difficulties. They actually, it's 3 times because they're 2 times more likely to experience substance abuse difficulties. When we look at rates of domestic and interpersonal intimate partner violence, for example, the rates are often much higher, and those are much higher specifically for bisexual people rather than gay or lesbian people. Trans people in particular experience some of the worst disparities in terms of discrimination, abuse, suicidality. And the problem is, beyond just that they are experiencing these things, that there are lower rates of healthcare access, that LGBTQ individuals are less likely to have proper health insurance, to have adequate health insurance. They are less likely to have, access to individuals who they feel are understanding and competent and humble about their identities and their culture and their needs. And they are less likely to access that healthcare. It's not just a matter of having it. They may live in a community like Augusta where we've got, some decent resources. We're no Atlanta or New York, right? But we have resources, and yet I don't feel like I can go even access that healthcare because I've been discriminated against, because I am afraid to leave my house because of my identity, right? But it's also important to say that these health disparities are not because of identity. They are because of societal discrimination. LGBTQ people have higher rates of mental health, not because something is inherently wrong with them, but because they are discriminated against by a society that is heteronormative and cisnormative and treats LGBTQ people as an other. And this is getting better, but it is not perfect by any means. And unfortunately, we're seeing some slide back, at least here in America. And we know this is true because when we look at things like rates of acceptance, for example, trans children have an enormous high rates of suicidality. But the number one thing that predicts that those things are not present for trans kids is parental acceptance. And so it just goes to show that there's nothing inherently wrong with these kids. It's because when they feel loved and accepted, of course they love and accept themselves and are less likely to experience mental illness. Lastly, one thing I want to cover is trans broken leg syndrome. So this is a term that means basically, I tell it often as a story. A trans individual comes into the ER and they tell the doc, they get admitted and everything, they're in a room and the doctor comes in and says, well, what brings you in? They said, I broke my leg. And then the doctor goes, well, I notice here on your chart, it says you're trans. How do you think that impacted your broken leg? It doesn't. Their leg is broken. And unfortunately, we have sometimes a tendency to put everything in this umbrella, and it's not. LGBTQ people are ultimately people who experience the same health difficulties that many non-LGBTQ people do. And so it's important to hold in balance that queer identity does have an impact on health, but it is not the end all be all. A broken leg sometimes is just a broken leg. Ultimately, queer people have pride. I'm highlighting the disparities that queer people do experience, but it's important to note that the number of queer people in our communities is increasing. And that's not because there is some conversion happening or we're making people that way. It's because people have always been this way, but they finally feel, again, safe and open and accepted and understand that they can hold these identities and be a part of a community. And so it's important to not just go, oh man, all these queer people are having so many difficulties. They're fabulous. This is a fabulous community. I'm so proud to be queer. And I hope you can share that with your patients, that you can share in their joy of being queer. Attend Pride. It's coming up here in June. Be visible in your communities to support those LGBTQ people, even if you aren't. When we talk about cultural factors of Parkinson's, this is something that's a little less studied. I did try and do some examination of research studies out there and things that maybe kind of say, what is the culture of Parkinson's? A couple of things I did find. That often when it comes to Parkinson's and neurodegenerative illness, we hold the stereotype of older, affluent white males. And this is not 100%, right? But when we look at the individuals that are very forward-facing around Parkinson's in our culture, people like Michael J. Fox, Davis Finney, these are older, affluent white men. And so it can, whether we know it or not, create a picture in our head of, oh, this is who gets Parkinson's. And yes, there is some truth to the fact that Parkinson's tends to show up later in life, but it happens to all kinds of people at all kinds of stages of life. And so when we hold a stereotype in our head of, oh, this patient is in their 30s, it changes the way we interact when we're expecting them to be 60. Of course, there are exceptions, right? Muhammad Ali, as a famous example of someone with Parkinson's, but Muhammad Ali, passed away many, many years ago and is maybe not the person we think of first. And so just keeping in our head, what image do I have of a person with Parkinson's? It may look different than this one, and that's fine. But just knowing that whatever image you hold is going to show up in the way you interact with patients and interact with others with Parkinson's. I know I'm speaking a lot today kind of from a provider perspective, but I want to acknowledge those who are present who are not providers, who are our patients and their care partners. Parkinson's can be an identity and culture in of itself, that when people get diagnosed with any chronic illness, Parkinson's is no exception, that there is this identity process that happens, that people start to go, what does this mean for me to have this label of Parkinson's? And do I accept it as a label? I mentioned earlier that disability as part of the addressing model or acquired disability, some may consider neuro illnesses like Parkinson's to be a part of that. But it's important to remember that not everyone holds this label. Disabled carries a lot of weight. And in this country, disabled people are still treated differently. And we finally have some laws protecting them like ADA, but you have to know, does my patient view themselves in this way? There's this concept of the sick role, and it's from sociology, and I'm looking off to my phone because I took some notes that I couldn't pull up on my computer. And there's basically 4 ideas that we assign to sick persons. That sick persons are exempt from social roles. We don't expect them to do the things people who are not sick can do. That they are not responsible for their illness, and we often treat people differently when we think they brought this illness upon themselves. That they must try to get well. Illness is a temporary state. We don't view it in our culture as allowed to be chronic or permanent. And that sick persons must cooperate with medical care and they must try to get well. And so considering, what do we hold? What ideas are in our head about individuals who have illness broadly? In this case, Parkinson's, a chronic neurological illness. And do we expect people with Parkinson's, whether they're in our lives, whether they're our patients, whether they're ourselves, how do we approach? Do we feel like they must get better? They must cooperate with medical care? That's not necessarily how every person with Parkinson's is going to approach their illness. Intersectionality is a concept basically meaning that our different identities don't exist in a vacuum, that we are not just gay, we are not just a Parkinson's patient, we are not just in older age. We are many, many, many different things. And that these identities and cultures that we possess intersect and interact, and that it looks different to be a gay white male than it does to be a gay Black male. It looks different to be an older Parkinson's patient than it does a younger one. And often these identities intersect around power, that when we consider our society and culture, we afford a lot of power to people of certain identities, people who are married, who are white, who are Christian, male, straight, cisgender, right? And that people on the margins often don't hold these powers. And so we find that when people of multiple marginal identities intersect, that it's not necessarily that their difficulties compound. It's not a 1 + 1 = 2 situation, but that it looks very unique, and we have to be mindful of that. A great way in which this shows up, a great example, is access to resources. So in preparing for this, finding some resources from the Dave Finney Foundation that talked about this concept of, we may tell our patients to do certain things. We may say, you need to engage in healthy eating, right? But eating healthy is not always easy. Can you feed yourself? Can you even buy food? Do you live in a food desert? And do you have access to the resources you need to eat healthy? Do you know what that even means? And that all these different identities may influence a person's concept of healthy eating and their ability to engage in that. And we have to be mindful of that when we make recommendations to patients. Can you afford your meds? Can you afford to get DBS, deep brain stimulation surgery? Can you recover from that? In our panel discussion, it was such a wonderful thing to watch. And I really appreciated this idea of coming out as a concept that is really built up and researched and understood in the LGBTQ space. But in reality, we all come out all the time with lots of different identities. And that to come out as a Parkinson's patient requires vulnerability, disclosure, safety, and having other people adjust to view you in a different way than they did before, much the same as happens to be LGBTQ. And that coming out process happens over and over and over. You don't come out once, whatever your identity, and that's the end of it. You have to come out to people again and again and again. And for something like an illness like Parkinson's that is progressive, you have to come out repeatedly as maybe different statuses where you are at in the stage of your illness. And that is going to intersect with the other identities you hold. So as we work with each other, we work with ourselves and we work with our patients, we have to be mindful that people are not just one thing. They are many things, and those things interact with one another. So when we consider competence and humility, I want to lead you all in sort of a reflection exercise. I'm not asking at this point for you to turn on your mics and answer or even drop in the chat, but just to sit with yourself for a second as I walk you through some questions. First of all, are you aware of your own identities and the culture that goes with them? As we look at something like the addressing model, do you have difficulty identifying a particular identity that you have? Or is there any identities that you had not given thought to before? For example, Indigenous heritage or your nationality. Are you aware of the identities and culture of the people around you? And here I say patients and care partners as a reflection for our providers, but this goes for anyone. Do you know the people around you, what they identify as, or do you make presumptions based on the way they appear to you? Around power, are you aware of how others perceive you, your identities, and your behavior? And again, I word this as a reflection for our providers, but for anyone. Not only do you perceive others and make assumptions about their identities and culture, but your own is perceived. And so for our white providers, for our white individuals, you have to understand that you are seen that way and that people of color may approach you differently based on being as a part of a majority race. Are you aware of how you respond to others' identities? For providers, how you respond to your patients and care partners. For our patients and care partners, how do you respond to those around you and your response to their identities? Are you aware of the ways that you, the places you are, including your locality, your workplace, your homes, your institutions, are you aware of the ways in which they erect and maintain barriers that disadvantage patients? That by making patients jump through certain hoops or hurdles, they may or may not be able to access the healthcare they need. Are you taking steps to address these barriers, to empower yourself, to recognize the power that you have through your certain identities to try and improve the barriers that others have. I think of one of my patients who, in their own pursuit of DBS, has been trying to tear down barriers that have made it hard to get scheduled. That is managing structural barriers. And lastly, self-awareness. Do you make being culturally humble a key part of your practice if you're a provider, or your life as any person? Do you recognize the ways in which you maybe fall short of knowledge, of humility, of competency, but being kind towards yourself and striving to do better? And ultimately, do you understand that all of us, myself included, even if I'm the person giving this presentation, need to keep learning? And are you aware of the ways in which you have to keep learning? It's a lot to think about. Here, I'm going to focus a little bit for providers, but again, I would encourage those who access healthcare to advocate for these things if you notice them in the places in which you seek healthcare. When we talk about visible materials, does paperwork allow for self-identification, or is it just limited to a few identities? Do we ask, what is your gender, as opposed to, are you male or female? And do materials that we put out there show a diversity of identities? Is the images that the hospital displays showing people of different ethnic backgrounds? Is it showing partners that may be queer? When we interact with patients and interact within healthcare systems, are we asking someone their identity, but then ultimately not respecting it? Or maybe checking a box by saying, what is your gender? And then we use the wrong pronouns. Is a care partner presumed to be a spouse or a friend based on gender? And this can be the case not just for queer people, although I think often, but for anyone that, oh, well, I know that Mrs. Smith is straight and she's got this gentleman with her, must be her guy friend. And it's her brother, right? Are we making presumptions? And does staff lead by example? And I struggle with this too. I don't often do this, I will admit. I have displays of visible queerness, such as the badge that Dr. Esvold shared, but even then that doesn't automatically identify me as queer or competent. I may have just strapped it on because someone told me to. Am I leading with, hi, I'm Dr. Credell, I use he, him pronouns. What do you want me to call you and what are your pronouns? And is this environment present throughout our communities? We may create a safe space within one unit of a healthcare system, but then other parts of it are not the same. What about the transportation we call for patients to assist them with getting home? Waiting rooms? Do the ways in which we reach out to patients use accurate identifiers, but also safe? Are we considering that some patients may not be out in all environments? And so how do we make sure that when we reach out to communicate, we are not outing and sharing an identity that a patient may not have wanted to disclose yet? One of the last things I'll talk about is this concept of trauma-informed care. And I think this is a great thing to keep in mind, not just around LGBTQ identity, not just around Parkinson's, but in how we treat all people around us. That trauma is a bit of a buzzword right now. To use it loosely and not in the strictly medical psychological sense, trauma are things that have happened to us in our past that stick with us to this day. And often these things can be very upsetting. It's discrimination, it's violence. And understanding that when people are traumatized, that they may not feel safe in environments that we do, that they may not feel safe anywhere. And so how do we create an environment of safety? How do we acknowledge that people around us have experienced trauma and create a space that is safe for them to exist? That they may take, looking at these heads, they need space, including time, to pace themselves and calm down and react to a new diagnosis. That things need to be predictable. And in an environment like academic medicine, where you may see a different resident every time you come in, that can be really frustrating. That we want to give patients choice. It's not, you need to take this medication, but here are the options for you. What do you think? Ultimately, trauma-informed care means shifting from a concept of what is wrong with you to what has happened to you. To understand that all of us, had we gone through the same experiences another person has, may have ended up behaving and thinking and feeling in the same way. And to go, okay, I could say that my patient is non-compliant and unwilling to take their meds. Or I can say, there is probably something that has happened or is happening to them that makes it difficult. And that is worth exploring and addressing and accepting. So I know we hopefully have some time left for questions. I just want to say thank you. And I hope that, you approach this stuff with a spirit of self-compassion. It is hard work working around ideas of culture and identity. And so know that it is important, and know that as long as you are willing and humble to make changes and steps in your life, you are doing the right thing.
Thank you so much, Matt. That was fantastic. I'm like, oh, we need to invite you to our next staff meeting. So you explained all of it so well. I did not see any questions submitted in the chat, but Matt, for organizations or individuals who kind of want to take this sort of cultural compliance, maybe training, just to sort of better understand how we as individuals and, particularly healthcare providers, where could someone access, these types of trainings?
It's a really great question. When I think about things like LGBTQ identity specifically, you want to look for major organizations like the Human Rights Campaign, Trevor Project, and really want to look for reputable queer affirming resources that often will have trainings that are freely accessible, or slides you can download, or information. When it comes to ideas of culture and justice and diversity more broadly, again, these organizations are great, but we don't necessarily always want to approach these things again as a monolith, right? So thinking about, where do you want to make that development? So if it's around wanting to improve access and justice for people of color, then looking towards organizations that advance the rights of people of color, like the NAACP. Campaign for Southern Equality is a very regional specific one for LGBTQ people. So considering region as an identity, right? It requires some legwork, and within institutions too, looking towards, is there committees that are dedicated to these subjects? Like the Department of Psychiatry that I'm in has the DEIJ committee, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Justice. Is there a committee that is more broad across the whole institution and not just within one department? But also being careful that even if those things don't exist, don't automatically go towards the person of a certain identity and expect them to meet your needs. Many are willing, right? As a queer person, I am happy and love this part of work that I do to speak to queer issues. But not every queer person is going to feel the same. Not every person of color is going to feel the same. Not every person of a religious identity is not going to feel the same. And so just being humble and mindful as you approach people and say, is this something you're willing to talk about with me or not?
Well, thank you so much. The comments that came in, again, no questions, but somebody said the best presentation on cultural competence humility I've ever seen. So I would have to agree. So thank you so much.
Sweet.
And then somebody else said, I actually know this person, a speech language pathologist. Just want to say these presentations are amazingly informative, and I can't wait to implement them right away and share this webinar with others in my organization. So thank you, Matt. Thank you so much for being here today and for all the work that you did put into this program. Clearly, we can make a difference little by little. So I really appreciate it. All right, well, we are going to move right along to our next presenter. I'm really excited to hear Lance is going to be talking about, just pull up my notes here. Lance is going to be talking about, Lance Wilson is going to be talking about really where to find support and how to stay connected, especially for those who are at the intersection of the LGBTQ+ and Parkinson's communities. So I know this is going to be a really popular presentation because I know we've heard a lot about the importance of staying connected and social engagement in particular, and finding resources that you're comfortable utilizing. So Lance is a social worker and the education and outreach coordinator at Jefferson Health's Comprehensive Parkinson's Disease and Movement Disorders Center, so Parkinson's Foundation Center of Excellence. So thank you so much for being here, Lance, and take it away.
Thank you so much, Annie. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming to join us on your Saturday. I know there's many things that you could be doing right now, but you decided to come join us. So I am very appreciative of that. Just to reiterate, my name is Lance. I'm the social worker and education outreach coordinator at the Jefferson Health Center of Excellence. And I go by he, him pronouns. And I was joking with the other Annie, Annie Brooks earlier, because I was like, there's nothing left for me to present. Everybody's done such an amazing job. And a lot of the things that were talked about tied directly back into your support system and how you maintain connected and how do you feel safe when navigating the intersections of being LGBTQ plus and also having an identity or being an individual that's navigating Parkinson's disease, either as a patient or as a care partner or caregiver. So I'm hoping that I will be able to tie something back that you guys will be able to take away, because there's been so much rich content thus far. I just don't know if I have anything to give you guys, but we're going to try and we're going to try and see if I do. All right, if my computer wants to cooperate with me. All right, so the first thing I want to call out and point out is that when we're talking about support, we're talking about making sure that people are tied to the right levels of care and the individuals that will be helping them kind of navigate their space, is that it's your support. It's unique to the individual. I can come up here and tell you all these great ways and great things about this is how you find support. And you'd be like, I've tried all of them and none of them worked. And you know what? That would be okay. Because it's unique to the individual and what they need. So when you see Just Do You, that is exactly what this is about, because your support is going to be tailored specifically to what it is that you feel as though you need. And I would be very irresponsible if I didn't acknowledge COVID's impact over the last 2-3 years or so, because a lot of people have had a cut or have not been able to access their support networks as heavily as they may have pre-pandemic. I hope and really hope that we're moving past that, but as we see numbers going up again, I think that we still need a little more time to kind of get all these things under control. And, kind of going back to that first point, and when fusing it with the third point, is that there's not a right answer to your support, right? So I can say, oh, this works for 95% of the individuals I work with as a social worker. And you'll be like, well, I guess I'm in the 5%. So there's no right answer. There are suggestions. I hope that if this has not been something you've thought about, or especially if you've been an individual that's been struggling with the isolation piece that COVID has presented us, that these might be some places where you can start, or start even having the conversation, or just have playing in the back of your mind when you are acknowledging or trying to identify what those supports might look like for you. Okay, so the one thing, and I'm going to get a little touchy-feely, so I apologize. I am still a social worker after all. So the first thing, and it's been mentioned, is you want to feel safe in where you're getting your care. So affirming care is a giant hallmark for making sure that people are actually going to, one, be compliant with treatment, as well as being honest and upfront with their provider about the things that might be bothering them. And this is for any provider. This does not mean it's not specific to LGBTQ, and it's not specific to individuals navigating Parkinson's. So I challenge you, the next time that you go to your provider office, or you go through telemedicine, or you even call to schedule an appointment, just tap into how do you feel, tune into how you feel in that moment. Do you feel like, even if that person doesn't identify you, or they don't know that you might be LGBTQ plus, do you feel comfortable speaking to the reception staff? Do you feel comfortable speaking to your provider about a vacation you might have lined up with your significant other? And then, of course, also taking into account the other support staff that you come in contact with and other clinicians. So for me, you might talk to me, you might talk to my nurse, you might talk to my nurse practitioner, or you might talk to my fellow or my care coordinator. So, there's a lot of different people that you come in contact with at the office, and you have to make sure that you feel safe, because ultimately that's going to increase your outcomes when you're navigating, trying to get the best care possible for you. And it's been mentioned already, but the Human Rights Campaign Foundation, this is their 15th year of putting out the Healthcare Equality Index. And what this is that it's a grading system that the Human Rights Campaign grades different institutions based off of their criteria of what would be an affirming place for care. So these are the 5 points that they kind of go over. There's a lot of subsections, and honestly, I would need a book to try and go over all the criteria. But these are the main sections. So we have non-discrimination and staff training. Are the individuals that you're going to see in this medical institution, are they being trained on diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, justice? Are they being trained on all of these different aspects of how we could most effectively work with individuals who have historically been displaced and mistreated when navigating the medical system? Also taking into account patient services and support. So anything that's outside of sitting down with the actual physician, what other supports does the institution have access to? And are they geared towards people with other identities, whether it be racial or identifying as LGBTQ+, employee benefits and policies. So, there's a lot of breakthrough things happening with people being able to have their insurance cover things like gender confirmation surgery and things of that nature. So is that something that the institution is allowing their employees to have access to through their benefits that they're being given? Patient and community engagement. It's all great to have trainings, and it's all great to have these other aspects of the care, but what else is happening outside of clinical care? Because we know that LGBTQ+ individuals have to fight for a lot in a lot of different spaces outside of the medical realm. So are we doing our part as providers to make sure that we are engaged with the community outside of the clinic room or the clinic space? And being sure that that individuals are responsible citizens, meaning that making sure that we are, up to snuff when it comes to making sure that we are not regressing. We are using affirmative language. We are making sure that we tune in to how people want to be identified, and we uphold those standards as we go out into the community, and we acknowledge and we make sure that our colleagues, if that's something that they don't have practice with, that we have no problem, I don't want to say checking them, but in a way, making sure that we hold them accountable as colleagues, because the medical realm can be very scary for many people that also possess the LGBTQ or fall into the rainbow acronym, as one of my friends calls it. Okay, so Kimberly Crenshaw has been brought up already. She's a law professor at Columbia, and then she's credited with one of the biggest terms that we use nowadays, which is intersectionality. And I think that intersectionality, it just really plays into literally everything we do. So I'm really grateful to have been invited to speak to you guys, because I do a lot of conversation about LGBTQ plus individuals, how we can be more cultural humility and all the aspects of working with this type of population. But I also do a lot of Parkinson's disease talks on how to show up for those individuals. So to fuse them together is almost like a eureka. Of course, this is a thing. But the reason that I wanted to kind of call out or shout out to Kimberly Crenshaw is because intersectionality just really allows people to take up multiple spaces at once. I am a Black man. I am cisgender. I am queer identified. I have all of these identities, but sometimes it feels like we only can be one in a space. But that's also how we can make this work for us. So when we're looking for support, sometimes we won't find a space that is not that it's not welcoming, but we don't always have a space that will allow us to be all of ourselves, or will allow us to be all of ourselves, but it's not specific that it's allowing us to be all of ourselves. So I bring up intersectionality as though it can be something that empowers a person. It also can be an advantage when you're looking for support. And the way that I'm going to say this is that, there are Parkinson's support groups, for example, that lean more heavily towards reaching out to the Black and African American community. That's not to say that they are not affirming of other identities that people bring into that group, but that could be a specific intersection of that person or that individual with Parkinson's or their care partner that they might be able to lean into to get additional support. So I mentioned all of this to say that don't sleep on the other aspects of who you are, because you might actually be able to use that or lean on that a little more to get the support that you might not have otherwise been able to access. So for when we're talking about LGBTQ plus PD plus any other intersection that you may possess, and I think that individuals of the LGBTQ plus community have absolutely done this, going all the way back to Marsha P. Johnson and Stonewall, is creating and taking up space. It is important for us to sometimes it's difficult for us to be in spaces where it feels like there's nothing for us. But it's not abnormal for us to also create our space. We create our safe space. And we make sure that the people around us know that this is our safe space. So sometimes it requires a little bit of creativity. And you don't have to do it alone. But like it was already mentioned, we're a community for a reason. We have other individuals that we can team up with to help us take up space and help us create. So the burden does not fall alone on one person. Linkage to community organizations and institutions. I know in Philadelphia, we have a slew of different organizations that are LGBTQ centered. There's a lot of supports, there's a lot of different places, but I also acknowledge that people who do not live near a major city, such as Philadelphia, may not have access to these types of organizations. So the one thing that I will say that COVID has allowed us to do is to really lean into and tap into all of the virtual options that we might have had access to, but never leaned this heavily into. So I promise if you just do a simple search on the internet, you can absolutely find whatever the closest city is to you. You might be able to find some online events or some online conversations because it's not normal for humans not to connect to other humans. We are not meant to be isolated, and we're not meant to be individuals that don't have other connections with other individuals. So please take advantage of the online abilities that we have now. Even now, and it sounds like most people or a lot of people are presenting from Georgia. I'm in Pennsylvania. So, even allowing us to connect in this type of way, don't sleep on that. That's something that we can use. Attending LGBTQ plus events. So just like I was talking about having Zoom and online events, you can absolutely lean into these other events to find support. Sometimes you can show up for one thing and, leave with making a best friend. So absolutely lean into showing up for the community events. But I also want to acknowledge that I do understand that there is a very large population of individuals who cannot necessarily navigate spaces for LGBTQ plus individuals because of issues with possibly coming out, or what other things that might come along with that. And you know what, I just kind of want to change the language from coming out to letting people in, only because coming out really puts the burden on the person, and it almost puts it in a space, puts them in a space where they have to now tell everybody who they are when they already were that person. Allowing people to come into your space and allowing people to see who you are and allowing them, you're granting them access to you. So coming out just feels so labor filled, and makes it feel like it's a chore to do. So letting people in, you know, you allow who you want to be in your access and in your network. So I want to make sure that people feel empowered when we have that conversation about who you're letting in is ultimately who's going to be your support network. But I, of course, also acknowledge, like I mentioned, the people who don't, for safety reasons or security reasons, can't naturally or be their true selves in the different spaces that they navigate due to fear. And I also want to lift those people up, because building support around your core identity, or one of the aspects of your identity, and not having ability to navigate that freely, is something that sometimes we take for granted. Peer mentoring networks. So I know that there are a lot of peer mentoring networks across the world. I know we do it specifically when someone is interested in trying to find someone to help them kind of adjust to diagnosis. We have it for people who are interested in maybe one of the surgical procedures, such as deep brain stimulation. So they can speak to people who are navigating this in real time, or have navigated it prior to them considering this option. So being tied to other individuals with Parkinson's that might also share this identity of being LGBTQ plus, might be something that your physician or your medical office might be able to assist with, especially when I know my providers are really good with linking certain personalities or certain individuals to other individuals. So that might be something to inquire about from your medical provider, to see if there are any peer mentoring possible connections that they might be able to make with other patients. Of course, there's a consent process and making sure that both parties feel comfortable with that. But absolutely, I mean, the more people that you can add to your circle, the better. Support groups. And his support groups are always hit or miss with people, and I completely acknowledge that. But support groups are a good space to create that kind of inclusive circle, right? So there's ways that people can come up with inside jokes that very similar to the LGBTQ community, such as there are certain languages, certain things, and certain inside jokes that we have that we can use, but anybody outside of that, they better not try to use it, because it just is not appropriate. So I just want to acknowledge that support groups can be very beneficial, but I also understand that sometimes they can create some anxiety around navigating disease and navigating almost feeling like you need to let those people in as well. But the one thing I will say about letting people in, AKA coming out, is that you have the key to that door. You don't have to let anybody into your whether you consider it your business, whether you consider it your space, whether you consider it your safety. You don't have to let anybody in that you don't want to let in. The next thing is mental health providers, which sadly all of us have been social workers, clinical social workers, counselors, psychiatry. We've all been stretched thin, especially over the pandemic. I think that there is a lot of people who may not have navigated mental health or acknowledge that there might be some underlying mental illness until COVID hit. And that isolation really teased out a lot of things that people may not have dealt with because they were able to either distract them or they didn't have them until they were isolated. Anxiety and depression being some major ones. But mental health providers, if you have access to one, they are great supports. They are allowing you to have a safe space to acknowledge these things that are difficult to kind of process, and they're outside of the circle, right? So you allow them in, but they are not attached to your main circle. So they might actually have some really good insight. And also, I don't think that when I've given talks like this before that I really leaned into people's faith bases, right? So the community, the church community specifically has become very, and has been very prominent in many different cultures, specifically looking at, the African-American community and the Latinx community. And sometimes we kind of just breeze over the religious spaces. Just like we were talking about paperwork, does your intake form ask about people's pronouns? Does it ask about their religious affiliation? Does it ask about all the other types of supports that they have? I know that, and it was also mentioned when someone was mentioning DBS, I have a DBS social work assessment where the biggest thing that we're trying to acknowledge is, or tease out is, do you have the supports? Who are your supports? Let's identify them. Let's call them by name. Let's put them down in your chart, in your file somewhere. Do you have all the other social supports that you need? Do you have insurance? Are you navigating employment? Do we need to talk about FMLA? Do we need to talk about short-term disability? All these things. And that's why it's difficult for me to have conversations like this without people kind of ping-ponging back and forth, because there's a lot of nuances that come along, and me being able to speak to them as a social worker that I don't always have the luxury, but we'll have time for that in the Q&A. So key takeaways, this is a very short talk, so I hope that it'll allow us to get back on time. But I really am open to hearing some of the things that you guys have to say. But the key takeaways is that I want you to acknowledge, and I want to acknowledge, that it takes courage. It takes courage to be someone that is out as an LGBTQ individual. It takes courage to be a trans individual. It takes courage to navigate and waking up as a Parkinson's individual navigating Parkinson's disease and a care partner, to wake up and do this all over again. And I also want to point out, and one of your takeaways is that it's your definition. No one else can dictate how you feel and what your support system looks like, because ultimately it's your permission. You create what your space looks like. And again, leaning into the community, we are a community. We are not, as it was said, and as a good friend of mine always says, the individuals are not a monolith, right? So just because you met one LGBTQ person does not mean that that is your schema for all LGBTQ people. Just like if you meet a Black individual or meet a Latinx individual or AAPI individual, does that mean that that is your entire representation? And there's a lot of assumptions, as we talked about previously, but I also just want to acknowledge that this is, I'm sorry, the ice sounds like the ice cream truck is coming. So I also want to acknowledge that it's human first care. So just like when people say, oh, well, I didn't need to learn about LGBTQ plus because I treat everybody the same. That's a problem, because we know, historically speaking, LGBTQ people and individuals have not been allotted the same level of care that others individuals have had access to. Now, I do want to say happy Pride. This is my contact information if you have any follow-up questions that may not be answered in the Q&A. I'm not going to lie, this was a difficult talk for me to put together, though it is short. I hope that you guys got something from it. And the reason being is that because there's so many great speakers already. But this is it's hard to really help people build support without because it's individualized, just like your care is individualized, right? So building your support system requires people to lean into sometimes spaces that are a little uncomfortable, and trying to help them figure out who might be already in your circle that could be a support to you. But with that being said, thank you for your time. Happy Pride. Again, my contact information if you would like to connect offline. Other than that, I think I am all good. Annie?
Thank you so much, Lance. That was amazing. Yeah, we've been really fortunate to have such a stellar lineup of speakers today, covering so much great content, Lance, yourself included. So thank you so much. Everybody's been a little shy today in the chat, so I really haven't seen any questions come through. But Lance, I guess, you know, as a social worker, what advice would you give to sort of your fellow social workers, you know, as they have more and more, you know, conversations surrounding this topic? Like, if there's one piece of advice you would give to your fellow social workers today in terms of how to care for and treat this community of people, what would it be?
So if I had to put out a disclaimer to all of my social work colleagues, I would let them know that this takes work, and there's a lot of misinformation that people have access to. I would implore them to do their self-work, because we know that biases are not something that people are without. And sometimes it's, like it was mentioned, sometimes it feels like LGB and the T gets left out. But I absolutely implore all of my colleagues and everybody on this call and everyone that's going to be watching this, to love all of us. That whole LGBTQIAAP2 community. Didn't know I knew that, did you? But I implore people to just love on us, because that's our community is what we have, when we're trying to, when our backs are against the wall and trying to navigate and tear down some of these barriers, and some of the trauma responses and some of the outcomes of said trauma responses that we've had to navigate, being a part of the LGBTQ+ community.
I had another note come in from a support group facilitator, and this individual just, you know, said, thank you so much. I hope that my group is seen as inclusive. So I guess on that note, you know, specific to maybe any support group facilitators that may see this presentation, you know, do you have any advice for those facilitators in terms of how they market their support group, how they lead their support group? You know, what can they do to sort of make it a more inclusive and welcoming environment for all who are affected by Parkinson's and their care partners?
Absolutely. I think that, you know, sometimes I know for my support group, sometimes I lean in a little bit more to specific topic content. So it'll be like, hey, we're talking about this at this support group. So maybe a few of the talks being more focal, kind of honed into sports specific topics, such as navigating the healthcare continuum as an LGBTQ+ individual. Again, it doesn't always have to be advertised, but the people who do see it advertised that do identify as LGBTQ+ are going to feel 1,000 times more welcome. But I also know that it's very hard as a support group leader to navigate and kind of keep contained all the different personalities that might be in the group. So I think that, you know, as long as you continue to, as a support group leader, or anybody that might be listening to this that is a leader, is try to make sure that everything maintains a respectability level, and making sure that it is understood by all of the individuals is that we are inclusive to all people navigating this disease. And that is that's burdenous enough without not even bringing into all the other intersections that they might possess.
Thank you so much. And Lance, thank you for including your contact information. You are such a tremendous resource for the foundation and I know will probably be a tremendous resource for those who have joined us today. So I appreciate that. And thank you for your time. You, yeah, you're a joy to work with. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. All right. So now to really close out today's program, I'm very excited to introduce Pastor Elise Riney, who's going to talk a little bit about spiritual care in Parkinson's. And Pastor Riney is from The Way CSRA, and I am excited to hear what you have to say. And I'm going to share your slides. Bear with me one moment. You see my slides?
I do. Thank you
Wonderful.
so much. Well, good afternoon. Like she said, like Annie said, I'm Pastor Elise Riney, and I am so honored to be joining in this conversation today. We have covered a lot of great information, and when I was first approached about joining this conference and this discussion, I was a little taken aback, just because I was like, okay, so what can I add that would help in this situation? Excuse me, in this situation and conference, besides the fact that I am part of the community, the LGBTQIA plus community. And so anyway, spiritual care is something that makes a lot of people very uncomfortable to talk about. It's especially for our community, because it causes a sense of being uncomfortable, because we have been basically feel we're forgotten about, pushed aside and not really listened to. So this area in our lives, the spiritual area in our lives, goes unforgotten and unnurtured. And a lot of people, when they think about spiritual care, they automatically go to religious views or denominational views, and they don't understand that spirituality and religion are different. And so the spirituality is the quality of being concerned with the human spirit or soul, as opposed to a material or physical things. So when you start thinking about, put aside the doctrines and the religion side of it, and think about how you connect what's with your spirituality, what brings you peace, what brings you tranquility. Because your spirituality is where you draw your strength and where you get your empowerment, because it's things that you understand to be true to you and your understanding. And so there's 3 elements of spirituality, and one of them is relationships. And in the way excuse me, the way in which 2 or more concepts, objects, or people are connected, or the state of being connected, is how we explain relationships. And so in order for you to be strong in your spirituality and have a good understanding of you, is explore and discover how you connect spiritually, what brings you your inner peace and your calm. And your spirituality, your spiritual care is also one of those things that helps you in your health. It helps you have peace and comfort. The values and life purposes are also parts of the elements. And the life purpose consists of the central motivating aims of your life, the reasons you get up in the morning. It guides the life purpose guides your decisions, influences your behavior, shapes your goals, gives sense of direction, and create meaning. So when you're going through a challenge, having a good spiritual foundation helps you get through that, because it's helping you decide what's best in your life decisions, your behavior, the goals you're shaping, and the sense of direction that you're taking. And of course, it helps you create the meaning. And so the importance of the spiritual care is that it helps define what we need to do to build ourselves up. And the definition of the spiritual care, self-care, is any ritual or practice that we do to further our connection with a higher self. Your higher self is who you truly are as an individual, the real you. The higher self is you that is disassociated from and not influenced by the ego or fear. And that's why it's important to explore and discover and connect with who you are, because once you are connected and understand your spirituality, that gives you the freedom to live your truth and not be put in boxes or be thought of as less than or different, or allow yourself to be excluded because you're able to walk in confidence in your spirituality. And the spiritual self-care is the activity we engage to find and nurture a sense of connection to the higher power and meaning for our lives. Just as it is essential to nurture your body with food, it is necessary to nurture your soul with spirit. There are many spiritual paths and spiritual support systems. And so you need to not be afraid to go out and connect with people. Anything that you're involved in, having open communication, letting them understand where you are spiritually will help build a community of people where you are spiritually, and help you even explore and investigate and go deeper in what your spirituality means to you and how you can grow. And like I said, a lot of people get them confused, spirituality confused with religion and denomination and doctrines, when spirituality gives you the freedom to grow without constraints and the doctrines, and the freedom to live in your truth. And so the spirituality is the main key for me in spirituality. When I started getting away from how I was brought up in a Southern Baptist household, and coming out was a thing. But with that being said, when I started discovering on my own, stepping away from the religious side and doctrine side and discovering the spirituality, exploring, why am I here? What is the big question? What was I created to do? And any challenges health-wise that I have faced, being able to be secure in being able to answer those questions of why am I here? My personal reason for being here is helping build bridges for people where they can make connections on their spiritual walk and build community, so they can learn how to strengthen their relationship with that higher being, their higher self, and understand that they have purpose. And some of the challenges that we face, whether they be health or financial or in relationships, anything that we are challenging us, just makes us stronger, because we're able to learn and connect with people going through the same thing, or people that might have been where we were and how they've overcome. And so understanding your spirituality is so very important, and doing the self-care in that area, because it does help with our gaining our peace and understanding. And studies have shown how cultivating a spiritual life can have numerous health benefits. A practice in spiritual self-care quiets the mind and helps to calm the turbulence within, leaving space to begin feeling and honoring what your heart yearns for, and having the courage to take the necessary actions for good change. This helps you center. There's many ways to connect with your spirituality. There's reading and studying, there's meditation, there's yoga. I like, for me, to connect on a really with my higher place self and in a really high spiritual place, is to get out in nature. I like to tell the story because I work at AU Health, and in my role there, it can be very stressful at times, and it's very high stress. And with COVID, it was a lot of day-to-day craziness, and we sometimes have to step away. And one day it was very draining, and for me, I had to step outside, and I went and I found a tree that I just had to touch and anchor myself and bring myself back in from the energy so I could maintain my energy level and reset my vibrations. And spirit, and knowing yourself spiritually, you'll know what feeds you and you'll know what you need to do to reset your atmosphere or reconnect with yourself and be able to bring back that inner peace and that calmness. So it is very important to nurture that spirituality because it does play a lot of factors in health benefits. It's some of the things that the studies have shown is it improves relationships and connection with others. It stops the feelings of isolation and loneliness because you're out there studying and connecting with people that are practicing their spirituality the same way you are. So spirituality brings connection. You experience more inner peace, peace of mind, also described as an inner calm, and it refers to an internal state of tranquility. When you have mental peace, you might feel at ease within yourself, a sense of self-compassion, able to enjoy each moment, loss of interest in conflicts because you are now moving in a higher vibration and a higher understanding because you are practicing your spirituality. You don't have time to waste. You don't allow yourself to be brought down by things that don't interest you or in conflicts because it takes so much energy, and the ability to be spontaneous instead of allowing fears of past expectations to stop you. So when you're able to really get to know yourself and what your views and values are spiritually, you will start to be less tied up with conflict, loss of time being spent doing things that do not interest you. You'll be able to act more spontaneously, be in the moment, enjoy being who you are. You will gain clarity on what makes you happy, and you'll be able to let go of the worry because you understand yourself and what brings you that peace. It also enhances feelings of oneness and universality. So it really brings the feeling of community because you're able to connect not just with other people, but to be able to connect with people on a spiritual level. When I come with people of spiritually of the like mind, it is refreshing because you know instantaneously that we think on the same level and there's a peace and a calmness there. And it diminishes, like I said, it diminishes the feelings of isolation and loneliness, leaving a space to begin feeling and honoring what your heart yearns for. So you will be able to really understand what your passion is, what your drives are, what maybe you want to create something and you weren't sure how to go about creating it, but being able to understand yourself and nurture that spiritual side of you, you'll start understanding what drives you, what your passions are, what that creativity yearning is. You'll be able to go forward and not be held in one spot. And it deepens the relationship with self. It quiets the mind and helps to calm the turbulence within. And when we're going through things such as illness, we have a tendency to live in this state of confusion, state of what ifs, what could happen, instead of focusing on this is where I am, this is what I know, and this is how we're going to move forward right now. And so being able to connect with your spiritual self, you will be able to gain that peace of understanding and that calmness so you won't get lost in isolation and fear. And being able to have conversations that will help build the connections in the spirituality, this builds the relationship and support. And as Lance talked about in community, getting a community, going out there and getting like and affirming groups, building that connection, that's where you're going to get support. And you're going to be able to make those connections and build those relationships with some people say just hang with like-minded people. No, don't be afraid to have conversations, because building knowledge, building wisdom, getting to know one another helps break down those barriers that causes us to be separated and divided. And that way, by having the conversations. Like I meet with different faiths and different religious leaders regularly to become more understanding, more educated, because the differences and the lack of knowledge is what causes the separating. So once we understand that spiritually, we all, on a spiritual level, are equal beings, it's the religious views and doctrines and denominational views that do the separating. So once we all believe that we are on a spiritual level and start nurturing our spiritual selves and gaining that understanding of who we are and being able to live our truth, it starts helping and aiding in the health side. I also am a part of the spiritual care department at AU Health, and they go a long way in the spiritual care department when patients come in to be available. And they also help one assess their spiritual, where they are spiritually, so they can, the spiritual care person, the pastoral care person, chaplain, can help put the patient and support person in touch with someone that can help them along this journey, make the connections they need, and be fed spiritually. So by maintaining one's spiritual health and growth allows us to respond instead of just reacting to what is happening to us and around us during this time. Because we are spiritually strong, we're able to navigate and make it through hard decisions because we are at a peace with what is going on. We're able to understand the anger that we're feeling, the fear that we were feeling, the confusion that's going on. We are able to understand it better because we have a better understanding of who we are. So how do you honor your spirituality? So honoring your need to connect with your higher self plays an important part in knowing oneself and peace and self-compassion. We have to be not so hard on ourselves, especially when we're faced with challenges that seem sometimes too big to overcome. We have to give ourselves self-compassion and understand that it's just a moment and that we're moving forward. And so honoring our higher self will also give us a spiritual health and brings empowerment. And by nurturing that, it makes us stronger. And like I said, find what feeds you spiritually and make time to do it. Like I said, for me, taking walks in nature, going out and just listening to the vibrations of things going on around, noticing life and understanding how we're all connected brings such peace and calm and tranquility to me that I'm able to release the things that I do not need to waste energy on that may lower my vibrations. And spirituality is where you draw your strength and peace. So I just want to encourage everyone to not be afraid to have these hard conversations. Don't be afraid to study and venture into determining what your spirituality is, where you are in your spirituality, and then going forward and feeding it and nurturing and connecting with different groups. And as Lance also mentioned, you can go online and Google and find things that are interesting to you. I always find it interesting that people are always so shocked to find out that I am a pastor. And I was brought up with a Christian mindset. And I tell people I'm not necessarily Christian, I'm a follower of Jesus. But that doesn't mean that I shut down anybody else's ideas and how they can connect with their creator or their understanding of how they were created, who they are created to be. It all breaks down to spirituality. And so I encourage everyone listening, connect with yourself and gain an understanding of who you are spiritually. I promised I would keep it within my time, and because this has been a very long conference and meeting, but it has been so full of so much information that I just have enjoyed sitting in and listening. I thank all of y'all for taking the time to sit and listen with me. You can find me on social media if you're interested in how to find places to connect spiritually. I did not add my information, but I am easily found on social media. And our home campus is in Columbia. It's the Way, Columbia. And so we have many ways of connecting people. And I would like to thank everyone for inviting me. Thank you for listening to me. And this has been a true honor. And I have enjoyed it very much today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I know we are over time, but we did have one question come in, and I think in many ways you kind of addressed this, but maybe just to reiterate, this individual wanted to know how you would help someone overcome the, I guess, feelings of religious rejection to cultivate to cultivate their spiritual self in the present. So how would you encourage somebody if they felt rejected in the past by their particular religion or, religious group, or, how would you help them overcome that and really, again, cultivate their spiritual self? Oh, you're muted. Let's see.
Okay, there we are. That's what I face a lot of times. And thank you for the question, because I do have working in the hospital. I do not work in the hospital as a pastor. I have a different role in the hospital. I work in the patient family centered care department, and then I volunteer in the spiritual care department. But there are times when someone does not want to hear anything from anybody affiliated with spiritual care because of past hurts, past rejections, people not understanding. So when someone approaches me, I build a relationship. I'm not here to heal the hurt or the pain. I'm here to help you connect with your inner power, your inner being, and understand that you were created with a purpose. And it doesn't matter what box people are putting you in. You are here for a reason and created with a power, an internal power, and that we need to put away any misconceptions of how we are to be. I'm not going to take this down a real religious path, but it's all about making communication open and being able to meet you where you are, and understand that things that the patient and the support person are going through are just as important, and who they connect with and how they see themselves is very important. And there's no right or wrong way to connect. And that's what's so hard, is so many of us in the community have had it drilled in our heads that we're not a part, we're excluded, this is, we're wrong. But once you do the research and the study and really grasp your spirituality and understand there is nothing wrong with you, you were created to be exactly who you are, and your truth is who you were created to be. Once you understand that and let go of all the other stuff, you're able to move forward. And that's what I try to do when someone comes and talks to me, is let them understand that let's put all that other stuff away, because it's just taking negative energy and making you waste that energy on that, instead of being able to move forward and get stronger and be able to face the challenge such as Parkinson brings for you and for the patient and the support person, being able to let go of the past, because that's just going to hold you in the past. Let's just move forward and build you into your spirituality, what you understand and what you feel you need to nurture in yourself. And that's the way I go about it. But I do understand there's the term church hurt. A lot of people have that. A lot of people have and I've shared with fellow team members in the spiritual care department at AU, a lot of patients in the LGBTQIA+ community, the minute a chaplain walks into the room, they shut down. They don't want to hear anything you have to say. And I said, you have to be able to get a relationship built and put away we're here to save you. That is not what spiritual care department's here for, to save you. We're here to get you on your journey. How can we be of assistance to you while we're in this chapter? And how can we help you move forward and not be stuck in the past? So I hope that answered your question.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Pastor Elise. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. I just had a couple of closing remarks that I will fly through as quickly as possible. But I just, again, want to thank all of our amazing presenters for their time. I want to thank everybody who helped in the planning of this program. And I want to thank you for spending not 1 hour, not 2 hours, but 3.5 hours with us today. So thank you so much for doing that. We did record today's sessions and we'll make them available to everybody. We will also provide links to resources and slides, because I know we've shared a lot of really helpful content today. Please do stay on for just a moment longer. Once the Zoom window closes, a survey will pop up on your screen. And then in order to make these programs better and more effective, we really need to hear from you. So please take a moment to do that. And if you had a question that was not answered here today, please do call our toll-free Parkinson's Foundation helpline at 1-800-4PD-INFO. You can also obviously contact SAGE's helpline as well. There are so many resources available, so it's just a matter of tapping into those. As you can see, these are just some of the resources that we offer people with Parkinson's at the Parkinson's Foundation, including, as Cheryl mentioned earlier, a new guide for LGBTQ+ community centers and health centers, so that they can better understand how to work with their Parkinson's patients. All right, and then PD Health at Home, if you guys are interested in getting more information about Parkinson's, we have a whole online series of mindfulness sessions. We have experts talking about Parkinson's topics. We have fitness, all of this and more. Just visit parkinson.org/PD Health. And if you have not heard of this, we do have a new genetics initiative going on. So any of you with a diagnosis of Parkinson's can get involved in PD generation and help us map the future of Parkinson's. For more information about this exciting genetic study, which is at no cost to you, please visit parkinson.org/PD generation. We are really trying to encourage as many people as possible to get involved in this so that we can learn more about Parkinson's, what causes it, how to treat it, hopefully eventually how to cure it. All right, and then if you're interested in getting involved with us, we hope you are, please join us at a Moving Day walk near you. Moving Day is fantastic. It's a celebration of movement and exercise, and they happen all over the country. Parkinson's Revolution is an indoor cycling event that you can get involved with on June 11th. Again, we'll put these links in the chat. And in conclusion, we just, again, want to make sure you have our Parkinson's Foundation website and toll-free helpline. And please do stay on for just a brief moment to complete our survey. I also want to, again, thank the Medical College of Georgia at Augusta University for really spearheading this and bringing it to our attention and making sure that, you know, we are doing more of these programs to make sure that we're reaching everybody with Parkinson's, right? Not just certain communities. So thank you so much to the Medical College of Georgia at Augusta University. They're one of our centers of excellence, and it's a fabulous, fabulous institution. So thank you so much. And thanks to all of you. I'm not going to belabor this any further, but I hope you have a wonderful rest of your weekend. And we so appreciate you being here with us today. Thank you.